Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Late Title Tuesday. I am your host for the day, Grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky, and it is a pleasure to be commentating the Late Title Tuesday for you guys today. The earlier tournament was really fascinating. I think it was won by two people, Hikaru Nakamura being one of them. And today this evening, we will see whether Hikaru will be able to pull off a two-peat and win the second of the Title Tuesdays, and that will not be the first time, nor probably the last, that he pulls off such a feat. But we've got a very, very impressive field here. We've got Andreikin, Fedoseev, Jeffrey Zhang. We've got all of the usual suspects. Bortnik is in. Mishanik, that's Alexei Sarana. Daniel Dubov. We've got Aram Hakobian, very strong Armenian Grandmaster. And headlining the last of the top 10, we've got German Grandmaster Matthias Blubaum, who very often finishes near the top of the pack. So there's 30 seconds to the start of the tournament, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you're having a good Tuesday, and your Tuesday's about to get a lot better once this tournament gets underway. We will be watching most of the top games. We'll start with Hikaru's game. In the earlier rounds, I will be toggling around the top 5-6 boards just to get a sense of how the top guys are doing. As the tournament starts to narrow down, as the top starts to narrow down, we will focus on the very top games. So I'll try to keep you posted as to all of the interesting games and all of the standings. 3 seconds, and here we go. The Late Title Tuesday, 11 rounds in total. The time control is 3 minutes per game with a 1 second increment. And Hikaru starting off with the white pieces against FIDE Master Scandal God. Okay. FIDE Master Scandal God, already a strong opponent in round 1, and Hikaru turning to his vintage Knight F3 and B3. He's played this almost exclusively in Blitz tournaments the last couple of months. The double fianchetto here, and he plays an early Knight H4 going after Black's Bishop H3, and usually White plays G4. There he goes, and he signals his intentions very clearly. He wants the two bishops, and Knight FD7, a nice move, but G takes H5, Queen takes H4, and E3. This is clearly theory. Hikaru going down this line. One moment, guys. Board. Let me just enable the board here. All right, just a moment. Sorry about that. This is my bad. I am putting on the board right now. Now you should see it. Now you should see it. Sorry, I pressed the wrong button there. All right, now we should be able to see the game. Let me know if the board is now working. I apologize for that. I actually forgot to click on the game. Okay, now we can watch the game. Hikaru already in an end game, but you can see how quickly he is playing. He has the two bishop advantage. And let me just do one more thing, ladies and gentlemen. I was following the game on the standings page rather than the actual board. But here we go. We have an endgame. Hikaru with the two bishops. Nice pressure on the king side. Definitely an advantage here for white. And Hikaru looking really, really confident here as he takes on d5. I think he wants to play rook ac1 and go after the c5 pawn. Let's see. a3 covering the b4 square, stopping knight db4 related shenanigans. This is the worst kind of position to have against Hikaru. It's a worse endgame. Maybe black wants to sack on f4, but that doesn't really work. If bishop takes f4, Hikaru will take on d5 first and then easily recapture the bishop with an extra piece. He's now threatening to get this knight and jump out to e4, knifing his way into black's position, attacking c5. If black plays b6 to defend the pawn, then Hikaru will have b4 exploiting the x-ray against the c6 knight. This is big, big trouble for black. He's also down a minute on the clock. I don't see FIDE Master Scandal God pulling off a first-round upset against Hikaru. And this is a very, very rough position. Some of the other top games that we have going, Jospim already winning his game. A lot of people already winning their games. We've got Dmitry Andreikin having the black pieces against FM Sergey Kim. I think that's his name, and Andreikin seems to be on the path to victory as he doubles on the e-file, attacking the 992. He's got massive pressure on the queen side. Queen b5, preparing the move c3. Very powerful move, opening up another attack on the knight. I think c3 basically wins the game, because after c3, white will have to move the knight, and then the b2 pawn is going to fall. And because of the tension down the e-file, black is simply going to promote one of his pawns. So knight g3, Andreikin can simply take twice on e1 and then play c takes b2, and the pawn is literally unstoppable. This is completely winning for black. So Dmitry Andreikin is going to win his first game. On board 3 is Vladimir Fedoseev. He also seems to be on the path to victory as he, or maybe not. I mean, material is actually equal. I thought White was up a pawn, but he's not. Material is equal, but International Master Ural 58, I think that's Alex Raprincev, has problems with his development, and now a nasty check on g4, preparing bishop g5, Vladimir Fedoseev developing with tempo. Although he is behind on the clock, rook d1 is another tempting move here, attacking the rook on d7. White is definitely better, but can Fedoseev win this game with 1 minute left on the clock as he plays bishop g5, sacrificing the pawn on b2? And I guess his idea is then to go rook a1, but knight h6 is a blunder. He's got queen takes d7, a desperado sacrifice, a classic, and now he is simply up in exchange in the endgame. This is an easy win for Grandmaster Vladimir Fedoseev, so he's going to win round 1 as well. Let's dial back to Hikaru's game, see how he's doing. Hikaru still on the path to victory. He's now up a pawn. He's got massive pressure on the queen side, and this d4 pawn, the only trump card in Black's position, is going absolutely nowhere, while Hikaru's past pawns, well, they are going all the way to promotion, and the game is over. c6 check, followed by b6 check, and the pawns are going to tear Black's position apart. This is a sure win for Hikaru, and he wins the game with 2:25 left on his clock. A pretty impressive first round win. Andreikin has won his game as well. We've got Jeffrey Zhang still playing, and actually in a little bit of trouble here against Eric Ranka, FIDE master from Finland, who I've played before. Very strong player. And Jeffrey is up a pawn, but White's compensation here is really obvious. He's got the 2 bishops that are kind of dominating over the position. Black's king is really weak in the absence of a dark square bishop, and you can see Ranka dialing up the battery here. He wants queen e5 when he's going to have serious threats against the king. He's going to have a mate threat. Now, Jeffrey could push his pawn to d4, and he decides to go queen g5, at least taking the sting out of queen e5. That will now just lead to a queen trade. Okay. Well, I guess queen e5 is still possible. h4 by Ranka, distracting the queen. He still wants to get that queen at e5. h4 is a really powerful move. And Jeffrey's in a bit of trouble here. Now, what he can do is queen takes h4, queen e5, and then d4, intercepting the bishop. But what that does is opens up a square for the other bishop on c4, where it will be attacking the knight on e6. So this continues to look very unpleasant for Jeffrey. And he goes down that line, d4. Now, bishop c4 looks really strong to me. That will threaten bishop takes c6, followed by bishop takes d4. But look at this move. Bishop takes g6, another capture. And that pawn on f7 is overloaded. If f takes g6, he takes the knight with check, and then he's going to win back the d4 pawn. This is looking really nice for White, but Jeffrey finding a counter blow. He goes f3, opening up White's king. And if g takes f3, he might want to trade queens, but bishop takes d4 is a blunder. He blunders a piece. And Eric Ranka panics after Jeffrey's counter blow, blunders a piece in one move. He probably only thought about knight takes d4 when White obviously delivers checkmate, but queen takes d4, that queen coming out of nowhere. And that was one of the purposes behind Jeffrey's last move. The move f3 opened up the contact between the black queen and the white bishop on d4, and this one's over. Jeffrey escapes Eric Ranka's clutches, and he's going to win round 1 as well. A painful game for the Finnish FIDE master, and that leaves us with just a couple of games in round 1. Alexander Bortnik is struggling against FIDE master Zivkovic from Serbia. e5 has just been played, queen d1 check. Notice that that pawn could not have been captured because of a discovered check, knight d5 check. Brilliant trick there, but this is looking really bad for Bortnik, who's got 6 seconds, but his ability to pull out completely lost positions is very well known and cataloged, but this one he's not going to pull out. Knight d2, threatening mate on b1, and Alexander Bortnik is on the cusp of suffering a round 1 upset. The move b4 wins on the spot. It prevents the king from escaping to a3. This is going to be checkmate if black can just escape the checks. C takes d5 is easy. e6, king b7, and the king escapes all the checks. Oh my god, he blunders mate! Or does he? Wait, he blundered a draw. What was king d8? Oh my god, what was king d8? King b7, and Bortnik can resign. Instead, it's at least a draw now, and now white might win the game. Bortnik might want to go for it. Bortnik might want to go for it here with e7 or e takes f7. He goes for, but he blunders a queen, knight c4. Oh my god, or does he blunder a queen? He's going to promote another one, and now he's worse, but he's got chances. The way black's playing, it's unclear. Anything can happen. Bortnik, oh, he blunders another pawn. Black is in complete freefall here, but he's still better. He's got the h pawn, and white's king is in big danger here. Zivkovic should still not lose the game, but he also probably won't win it. This is a dead draw. This is an easy theoretical draw. Even without white's 2 pawns, it's still a well-known draw because black cannot escape the checks. An early drama here, and Bortnik, oh my god, c4! C4! Oh my goodness, he's gonna win. He wins black's queen. An unbelievable turn of events here. He wins the game. Unreal. And the move knight a6 here still maintained a drawn position, but king b5, an instructive mistake. The king is the worst defender because it's such an easy piece to deflect. It has to respond to a check by definition, forcing the king out of the queen. And Bortnik, with an unbelievable win, leaves us with just a couple of games remaining in round one. You can already see the drama. This bodes well for the entertainment value of this tournament. We've got Brandon Jacobson en route to winning his game against a women's international master BSN Sun. I think that's Bayra Kavanova. That is a winning position for Brandon. He's up a full queen. He wins his game. Anton Demchenko struggling in his game against the candidate master, and this is going to be a draw. E5 was a drawing move. This is a dead draw. I mean, Demchenko has no way to make progress here. The kings are just dancing around. Black's pawns are perfectly well protected by the king, and there are absolutely no chances here, although black is not playing the most confident way, but this is a dead draw. There's just no way to make progress. They're going to have a 3-move repetition, and that leaves us with only 2 games remaining. One of them is this one. We've got a rook end game in a game between an NM and a GM. Vladimir Zakhartsov, he's struggling here as he almost flags. King g5, f7. f7 might have won the game. Well, then there was rook d8 check. No, this is going to be a draw. This is going to be a draw. And Georgi Dera holding Zakhartsov to a draw in the first round. One more game remaining. We've got a rook against the bishop. There always seems to be at least one game that, rook a8, there was king b5, and the pawn being on c2 was really helpful for black. That means the bishop is essentially untouchable. This is basically a dead draw. I mean, unless black blunders the bishop to the king. Bishop b3, look at that move. You couldn't have taken because of king takes e5. Eduard Limonov doing his best. That's definitely not his real name. Eduard Limonov is a very popular Russian writer. So not sure exactly who this is. This is an international master. He's won the pawn. This is still a draw, but our Daruda not showing good technique. Basically, what you have to do to draw rook against bishop is get the king into the corner opposite of the bishop's color, not the corner of the bishop's color, which is exactly what black doing, and he blunders the bishop. Rook b3 won the bishop, and he doesn't take it. Eduard Limonov could have pinned the bishop, but this still looks lost. Rook f8 is coming. Rook f8 is coming, and it's mate. Very poor technique there by black. And I am Limonov winning his first round. That was the last game of the first round. The second round about to begin. Let's have a look at the standings, which are still, of course, pretty meaningless given the fact that essentially all of the favorites have won their first game, including a couple of very close calls. Jeffrey Zhang pulling it out after black blunders a piece, and Alexander Bortnik. That was probably the craziest game in the first round. You can see almost everybody has won their game as expected. Let's go back to the main scene, and let's have a look at the games from round 2. Hikaru Nakamura playing National Master Miyagi, who has just played the fantasy variation of the Caro-Kann, this move f3, which has gained a lot of popularity in recent years, bishop b4. This position almost resembles a win-hour French. In fact, it could potentially transpose to a win-hour if white ever plays e4, e5. But Miyagi trying to play this in a unique manner, going bishop f4, developing one bishop, and queen d3. You see this move pretty commonly in the fantasy, but b6 by Hikaru, preparing the move bishop a6 and exploiting the awkwardness of the queen's placement. The queen sliding over to e3, and will Miyagi castle queenside? Yes, he does. This is what makes the fantasy variation so appealing. It's a variation that Caro-Kann players often don't like to face because white castles queenside, you get a very sharp position, and Caro-Kann players obviously like solid positions. So the move g4 here comes to mind. White's going to start attacking. White's going to start attacking on the king side, I would imagine. Okay. So probably g4. That looks pretty natural to me. How else is white going to start off his kingside attack? I guess you could also move this knight around to g3, offering a trade of bishops. Now, what Hikaru can try to do is exploit the pawn on a3, essentially acting as a hook, right? If you push the pawn to b4, that's going to force white to make weaknesses on his queenside because white's going to have to react to that. So Hikaru has a pretty clear-cut pathway of attacking on the queen side. B5, maybe queen a5, b4. You don't want to get these positions against Hikaru most of the time. As Miyagi also dipping on the clock, he goes king b1, a typical move that improves the position of his king, and now knight a2 stopping b4. So he tries to stop this move at all costs, but knight a2 looks really, really passive as Hikaru strikes in the center with c6, c5. This is looking pretty dubious for white. White has not done a good job of getting his pieces untangled as the bishop on f1 is blocked in by his own knight. Hikaru's pieces acquiring a lot of activity, the center opening up, d takes c4. Now, if f takes c4, you cannot play knight takes c4 because the knight on d7 is going to hang. So that is very helpful for white. No, Hikaru still takes on e4. I guess he wants knight f2. Oh, that's a cool idea. He wants knight f2, and he's going to win back. Well, what is he going to win back? What if white takes on d8? Oh, essentially, there's going to be mate threats on the first rank. No, this is really dangerous for white. So basically what's going to happen is after the queen trade and the rook trade, white can preserve the rook on h1, and we're about to see that very same line. But Hikaru is going to have tons of play down the first rank. I think rook d1 check, or even knight e4. He goes knight h3, but that doesn't look great. G takes h3, bishop g1, knight g1. He's going to win back one of white's pieces, but probably not the other one, as Miyagi is contemplating, I think you should take this knight. That was not an accurate discovery by Hikaru, and we're going to end up in a position where white has two pieces for a rook. I'm not convinced that black is better there. In fact, the eval bar seems to indicate that white is better. So g takes h3 here is essentially a must. White is also considering the move rook h1, which would allow Hikaru to repeat moves and get back to that starting position. As he starts with rook d1 check, now knight a c1 is going to happen. Hikaru is going to take on g1 and then take on f1. And then, oh, he takes on g1 immediately, bishop g2, bishop b2. White actually played knight ec1, and white is definitely in the driver's seat now as another pawn falls. Hikaru misevaluated something. It's a very double-edged endgame, 50 seconds for Miyagi, but a very good position as he gets two pieces for a rook. Hikaru has a big pawn superiority on the king side, and he tries to set those pawns in motion. g5 is coming, but Miyagi continues to get his pieces into the game. Let's see how Hikaru handles this position as he drops his bishop back to b6. Don't play c4 here because of a5, but white continuing to make progress, and now c4 looks really good. Now c4 looks really good, just pushing that pawn all the way to c5, chasing away black's bishop, but knight e7 check. That seems to be a step in the wrong direction. I guess he wants king f8, bishop d6, setting up discovered checks against the king, but Hikaru could also play king h7 or king h8. I guess then white wants to play c4, but c4 would meet with bishop e4, so not sure I like the way white is handling this. g5 is a very strong move by Hikaru. Now, you couldn't have taken the f7 pawn because of king g7, and two pieces would have been hanging at once. This is still a lot of trouble for Hikaru, and knight d7 there looked a lot better than knight g4. Miyagi making a lot of inaccuracies here, letting Hikaru back in the game. I think Hikaru is going to win this one given white's time situation. King g7 was possible. Hikaru hitting the knight on e7. If the knight drops to g6, then king g7 simply traps the knight. Bishop b4 looks like a forced move to me. 20 seconds now for Miyagi. I don't see him pulling this out. Knight c6, a6, still probably better for white according to the eval bar, but the position has sharpened up quite a bit as Hikaru making progress, and he blunders the knight in one move, knight e7, and that was only a matter of time, given the time situation. Miyagi blunders the knight in one move. Hikaru pulling out the second game as well, and he was definitely worse, but it was never completely lost. There were always chances. We go to board 2. That's Dmitry Andreikin with a big-time advantage against an Armenian IM Ohanyan. But Ohanyan, he's very, very fast, and he's very strong. He's underrated. And this endgame looks like it's pretty equal to me. I mean, the material is equal. Both rooks are pretty active. White has to drop his king back to f3 in order to defend f2. Now Ohanyan slides his rook over to b2. And he wants to play the move b6, which would create a passed pawn on the queen side. And if he can create a passed pawn on the queen side, black is not worse. I mean, Andreikin has to go passive now with rook a4. The position probably still equal objectively. The only thing that worries me about Ohanyan's position is the clock. It's not even related to the position as Andreikin approaches the center. Once again, king e4, h6, trading pawns, f4, supporting g5, rook b1, back to the promised land goes Ohanyan. He might want to hunt for white's kingside pawns with a move rook h1, attacking h4. So this is anybody's game. I mean, black could conceivably have winning chances here. Let's see how Andreikin handles this. He's obviously one of the trickiest players, one of the best Title Tuesday players in history. And I don't like rook h1 in this particular set of circumstances. I don't like that move. And the reason why is because he's allowed white's rook to infiltrate to c8. I think after rook c8, rook takes h4. So this is happening. g6 by Andreikin, sacrificing another pawn. F takes g6, he wants rook g8, so he wants to win back a bunch of black's pawns. But Ohanyan goes f5 check and rook g4, winning another pawn. This actually now looks bad for white. Something has slipped Andreikin's mind, and after king d5, rook d8 check is going to happen. Black's going to maneuver his way to c4. Ohanyan is now up 2 pawns, but he's got 6 seconds, and Andreikin now threatening the move d5. d5, Uh-oh, and the tables are beginning to turn. Here's a pawn race, h4. Who can stop each other's pawn? Whose pawn will promote first? The problem is that if black promotes, he promotes with check, which is incredibly important. So what Andrakin might have to do is actually abandon his own pass pawn. He might have to drop his rook back to d1 at some point, and that will essentially relinquish any winning chances white may hope to have, as Andrakin furiously trying to calculate the complications. What is he going to do? Rook takes c6, I guess, is also possible here, but then black has this incredibly important check on g3, which will allow him to take the pawn on d5. So Andrakin might have to take this pawn with his pawn, and then after h3, e7, h2, it looks like black is promoting with check as Andrakin goes rook d8. He wants to stop black's pawn from behind. 2 seconds for Ohanyan, who takes on e6. Will he go rook h6? He can't. He goes b6, creating a pass pawn on the other side of the board. Now, black seems to be the only one who can win the game. I mean, Ohanyan is up 2 pawns, but more importantly, he's got the outside passer. He's got the pass pawn that's furthest away from all of the other pawns. He's got great winning chances here. Andrakin's only trump card is the fact that his pass pawn is protected. So some drawing chances here for Andrakin. 2 seconds for Ohanyan, 10 seconds for Dmitry. Rook d5, check king b6. This is looking worse and worse for white. The eval bar doesn't seem too concerned, though, as Andrakin tries to hold up the a-pawn. But here comes the a-pawn, a4. And white has made no progress with his pawn. King a5, king e3, maybe try to get the king around. No, rook e1, threatening e6. Okay, a3, e6, a2, another pawn race, e7. But how does black stop the pawn? Rook a1. Rook a1, he's going to win the pawn with check, and white is making progress. Rook e2, a5, here comes black's other pawn. But Andrakin has successfully dealt with one pawn, and now here comes his king. He might actually win this game. King c5 is an excellent move by Ohanyan, recognizing the danger, coming back and winning the... Oh, he went the wrong way! Oh, and Andrakin should have gone king h4. Andrakin should have gone king h4. And he was actually winning. Now it's going to be a draw. White is technically a pawn down, but this is a pretty easy save, I would imagine. 1 second for Ohanyan as he tries his best to finagle a win out of this. Rook f3, though. Rook a4, king h6, and rook b4. And black has absolutely no way to make progress. Rook e4, though. Rook e4. Oh my god, Andrakin should have moved his rook off the 4th rank. Now it's winning after king g7, king f6, king e6. Oh my god, but where's the win? King f6? Where's the win? King e6 and king d6. King d6 and king c5. The win is king c5. He's playing this perfectly. King d5, and black is winning. Ohanyan is going to upset Dmitry Andrakin, the second seed, as he wins the f4 pawn. Exquisite technique in the endgame. And what a heartbreaker for Dmitry. It's checkmate. And Emin Ohanyan, one of the nightmare pairings, manages to defeat Dmitry Andrakin of the black pieces. What a scintillating time scramble there. As we have only 2 games remaining, Dmitry Kolar is also struggling, but this is going to be a draw against Vasily Korchmar, who is highly underrated. He's done really well in Title Tuesdays as well. This is a well-known theoretical draw, and here we have a draw by repetition, leaving us with 1 remaining game. It's a rook versus rook, and we always seem to have one game like this, which never ends, where one or both players seem to enjoy the time scramble and enjoy holding everybody up. But in this case, it's probably white. It's probably black, because white is 1 second, and he's lagging just a little bit. That's a good pre-move. This is going to be a draw. So we're just waiting for a draw by 50 moves and a big, big win. We're going to check out the standings, but Dmitry Andrakin goes down. We haven't looked at all of the top games. I'm trying to also figure out who else got upset. Let's see. Waiting for the standings to update here. Okay, so we're going to check out all of the standings, but yeah, I mean, other than Andrakin, I don't see any big upsets at the top. Fedoseev won, Jeffrey Zhang won his game, Alexei Serrano won, Dubov won. So essentially all of the other favorites won their game, including Hikaru Nakamura, who at one point had a very dubious position, but it was not meant to be for his opponent. Hikaru pulling it out. He's on 2 out of 2. Okay, well, this is getting a little ridiculous, but the game should end in a draw any second now. We'll have a draw by 50 move rule. You can see some grandmasters are making their opinions of the players known in the chat. And it really is a ridiculous thing to do in a tournament where you're holding everybody up. But a draw by 50 moves, and it's official. Round 2 is in the books. Round 3 is about to begin. And we will once again keep an eye on all of the top games. We've got Alexei Serrano. Already the matchups are a bit stronger. Before the games get underway, let's have a quick look at the standings just to look at all of the top guys. You can see almost everybody on 2 out of 2 except Dmitry Andreikin, who lost his game. Gatakamsky is also on 2 out of 2. That's Tigr Shlyapia. That's number 15 or so. So it's a huge group. 22 players to be exact out of the 234 participants at the tournament who have 2 out of 2. Okay, let's get back to the tournament and let's have a look at some of the top games. This is Alexei Sarana. Hikaru Nakamura is also playing. He's got 2 out of 2. His game is also in its opening stage. Let's have a look. Okay, he's playing another very high-rated FIDE Master and another one of Hikaru's vintage Knight F3, B3 lines. So this is a type of position which Hikaru is essentially unstoppable. I think he scores almost 100% of these double fianchetto lines where he just understands the ideas so much better than most of his opponents as he drops his queen back to e1. One idea for white here that comes to mind is knight d2 to e4. And the fact that the knight on c6 is undefended kind of hurts black. Another thing that hurts black is the fact that the bishop on c5 just doesn't have any retreating square. So white is going to secure the bishop pair and get a slight advantage. This is essentially just a slam dunk type of position for Hikaru. So we'll keep an eye on this game. Let's look at some of the other top games. Brandon Jacobson, we've got Andrew Tang playing. He doesn't play too many Title Tuesdays, so he's someone we should definitely keep an eye on. He's facing off against an IM from Ukraine, Rutenko V. Rutenko, probably his last name, as as Andrew Tang has taken up about a minute in the opening, but he's got a position that I'm pretty sure he's happy with. He's got some pressure going on the king side. He's angling to take white's bishop on g3. The only drawback of black's position is emphasized by white's last move, queen d3, setting up a battery against the h7 square. And now if Andrew were to take the bishop, this check, it doesn't lead to mate, but it essentially leads to a crushing attack after f takes g3. The f-file opening up is not something that black can afford. So Andrew has to keep his knight on f5 for the time being, and he does with queen f6, supporting the knight on f5. He is allowing the move knight d5, but then the queen can drop back to f7. So that's not the end of the world. That's not the end of the world. I see a question in chat. What does Tigr Shlyapia means? It means tiger in a hat. So it literally means tiger in a hat in Russian. And I'm pretty sure that's a reference to like a kid's cartoon, but you can look that up. Knight d5 by Rutenko as he gets his pieces into the center. And this is looking hairy for Andrew as he drops his queen back to f7. Knight e7 check here is a possible tactic, forcing black's king to the side, because obviously now taking the knight will result in immediate checkmate. The f7 square has been plugged by black's queen. So knight e7 check looks very natural, but Rutenko might be thinking about what to do after king h8. This is on the board. King h8 by Andrew is going to happen. There are simply no other moves. Perhaps Andrew missed this move, but he's lucky that after king h8, there is nothing immediate for white. So a pretty dubious position, but it looks like he's got everything defended for the time being, and there is no good way to put more pressure on the knight on f5. And that means, for the time being, this diagonal, this battery is neutralized. Knight a3, and he forces the bishop off of c2. That gives black a little bit more breathing room. I think b3 was an inaccuracy by Rutenko. And he actually might have to bail out now with queen takes f5, and he does. He's playing a great game. This leads to an end game, and he's going to infiltrate e7 with his rook, so I still would prefer white, but it's now a very double-edged position. We've got a couple of other beasts of Title Tuesday on 2 out of 2. We've got Enjal, that's Aram Hakobian, whose games we haven't looked at too frequently. We also have Brandon Jacobson en route to winning his game against Jabarok, international master from, I think that's Albania. Oh, no, Kyrgyzstan, my apologies. But rook c1 was a mistake. This is instructive. Brandon could have won black's knight by playing rook f2. He could have won black's knight by playing rook f2. And after rook takes f2, knight takes at d2. Knight has to drop back to d3. And, oh no, Brandon's already up a piece. I apologize. Brandon is already up a piece. But now, after knight b4, apparently it's not that much better for white because of all of the threats that black creates on the first rank. So if black is to play knight b4 now, he will be threatening a check on b1. And after the king steps forward to f2, there's a knight d3 fork, but instead he goes knight e7. Black currently with 2 pawns for the piece, and there's a third pawn that's hanging. Black is also threatening the move e5, e4, creating pressure in the center, and if that bishop can come alive, it can deliver a very nasty check on d4. So this is far, far from over. Brandon is up a piece, but he's got sort of all of his pieces kind of hanging in midair, and all of them are suspended and not well protected. So let's see what Brandon chooses as he goes rook c7. Now knight d5 looks pretty good. Now knight d5 looks pretty good, and he plays it. And look at this. If rook takes a7, the black plays e4, and black is better. Because if you move your knight away, you get forked. Bishop d4 check, forking the king and the rook. So Brandon now dipping on the clock as he goes rook b7. Now the knight can actually drop back to b6, and it does. And this is an amazing position. Even though white is a piece up, it almost seems like black is the one who has the initiative associated with this massive threat of pushing the pawn to e4 when the knight does not have any good escape squares. And the bishop comes alive, potentially delivering a very nasty check on d4. So a nasty position here for the favorite, Brandon Jacobson. Let's check back into Hikaru's game. Hikaru is still playing. He's got an endgame. This endgame is not easily winning. So white is currently up a pawn. Hikaru is up a pawn, but black is the one with the more dangerous pass pawn. That c pawn is tremendously dangerous. It's actually threatening to rumble its way forward to promotion. And Hikaru's king is incredibly far away. So this actually is a draw, probably objectively, as the moves are getting repeated. And will Hikaru find a way to produce winning chances here? I don't see anything. This is pretty amazing. This actually might be a draw. And we're going to have quite a few upsets in this round as Hikaru now drops to below a minute on the clock. I don't see a single way that white can create any chances here. I mean, king f1, there's a check on a1. Hikaru might want to play h4 and try to create a passer of his own. Oh, but that was a mistake. Black should have given a check on a1. Now, Hikaru's king is sufficiently close to the pawn, such that the rook can essentially move away from a8 and hunt down that pawn on h6. Now a6 by Hikaru. Black's king is stuck in no man's land. a7 is winning, and that didn't take Hikaru very long at all. A big mistake by black there not to give that check on a1 when he needed to. And now the rook trade is decisive. He trades rooks. He wins the pawn on c3, and the pawn endgame is an easy win for Hikaru because he's got the potential to create a passer, an outside passer, on the king side. In fact, he doesn't even need to take on c3. He can just straight away create a passer that is unstoppable. He makes a new queen, and he wins the game, moving on to 3 out of 3. There we go. We also have Daniel Dubov, who is struggling to win his game against Grandmaster Nikita Matinyan, who is also a very, very strong player. He's lower rated, but he's very, very strong. We've got an opposite colored bishop endgame. I think this is a dead draw. I mean, Dubov isn't even up a pawn. The material is equal, and black has a monster pass pawn on e3 that white cannot take his eyes off. Dubov trying his best here, but I don't see a single way that white can create a chance, and Dubov is essentially repeating moves here, moving his rook back and forth, and so is black. He's trying as he gets his bishop around to d5, but now Matinyan very smartly moving his rook to b6, tying down white's rook to the b3 pawn. I think this is going to be a 3-time repetition and a draw. Penguin, Andrew Tang, he's still playing against Rutenko, and they're in a time scrabble, and Andrew is on the cusp of losing his game. 2 seconds for white, but b2, here comes the pawn. White might have to give up his knight. No, he does give up his knight, and now the game should end in a draw, but if anybody's playing for a win, it's probably actually white, because white has 3 whole pawns for the piece, and all of them are passed, and 2 of them are very far away from black's king. But Andrew, he successfully won 1 pawn, and here he's going to win another one. This has not been very well played by Rutenko. He should still be able to draw this, but if Andrew can win his final pawn, then he's going to have a very good chance in white's time pressure. It's almost impossible to defend bishop against bishop and rook against rook, given when you're in time pressure. White could have actually given up his rook for black's bishop. Rook c4 was a dead draw. If he can give up the rook for black's bishop, it's an immediate draw, and I don't think Andrew has a single chance here to draw the game, to win the game. King f6, bishop b4, f8, queen. Oh, rook c4. Okay, white making this as complicated as it can get, but it's a draw. Andrew Tang fails to win his game, and a good game by the Ukrainian international master. Okay, where does that leave us? That leaves us with a couple of games that are still going. The field at the top beginning to thin out. Notice that Ohanyan, who defeated Andreikin, wins another game against a very strong international master. So he is one to watch. He's on 3 out of 3. And what else do we have? I think essentially all of the games are over. Okay, just one more game that's remaining. Another rook versus rook position and another draw. These are 2 players who've got 1 out of 1. Okay. Time for a sip of coffee. Yeah, well, this is another one of those games in which neither player wishes to admit that the game has ended in a draw and dragging it out, making everybody wait, which is, of course, their right. It's, of course, their prerogative. I'm going to eat some raspberries. Not much to commentate here. And I'm going to ruin my shirt. Dropping some raspberry juice here. Okay, time for a repetition, ladies and gentlemen. And let's check out, after this game ends, the standings. I remind you that there is a longer break after round 4. There is a approximately 6-minute break after round 4, so we will go on break after the next round. And generally speaking, I think by round 4... Oh, he blundered the rook G5! Oh my god, I was going to point out that was the one thing that white had to avoid. And Abun's persistence pays off. Unbelievable blunder by white as he walks right into a skewer and loses his rook. Anything else would be a draw. Just move the king to f4. Unbelievable. But anyways, that leads us to round 4. Okay, let's have a look once again at the updated standings. As we get into round 4, we can see the standings here. We see still a very, very big group with 3 out of 3. And that group, I think, actually also totals 22 players. That is very, very impressive. A lot of people still with a perfect score, and they include Garakomsky and a lot of the favorites, such as Brandon Jacobson, who did manage to pull out that very difficult position. So Brandon, kudos to him for winning a very difficult game. But we've already got some very, very interesting matchups at the top. In particular, Hikaru Nakamura facing what I would say is his first super challenging game of the day against Grandmaster Alexander Shimanov, and Hikaru clearly playing for a win with the black pieces as he plays a Dutch. But that Dutch is not looking all that great. He has a big weakness on e5, which is pretty typical for the Dutch. That in and of itself is not such a problem, but white can actually plant that knight on e5, and the g6 pawn is kind of what concerns me. You could notice that Shimanov kind of provoked the move h6 by playing h4, and here come his knights, knight b5 and knight e5, and there's no question in my mind that white has an initiative, but how do you follow it up? That's a big problem that people face against Hikaru. Sometimes he doesn't always get the best positions out of the opening, but he is so good at turning them around. He's so good at quelling his opponent's initiative, and here you see it. The knight has to move back from b5, and now it's Hikaru's turn as he chases the bishop off of d3, moving back to e2 and a5 by Hikaru, grabbing space on the queen side and preparing to move the knight back to a6, which he does. Bishop coming back to d3, kind of a funny sequence there. And she might be angling to play the move h4, h5, which in better circumstances will evince the weakness of the f5 pawn. Currently, h5 is probably premature on account of g5, so that's a move Shimanov has to keep in mind. He can also try to blast open the king side by playing g4. Obviously very risky since he hasn't castled yet, and he probably won't castle. He might actually keep his king in the center because that's the best place. That's the relatively safest place to keep it at the moment. Castling kingside would eliminate the possibility of a kingside attack, which is his main plan. As Hikaru trying to exploit the fact that white isn't castled by playing c5, opening up the center. And now I like Hikaru's position a lot more because he himself has established a knight on e4, which has just been captured. Now he's probably going to capture with the f pawn and vacate the f5 square for his bishop. There he goes, putting the bishop on f5, defending g6, chiseling his way into white's center. And now I'm a little bit more attracted to the idea of castling queenside if I'm Alexander Shimanov. I feel like the king has slightly overstayed its welcome in the center, and castling queenside would have the additional benefit of creating pressure down the d file. And he does castle queenside. Now, will Hikaru lock up the queenside by playing c4? That's kind of the typical move, c4, followed by a quick pawn storm. No, he plays c takes d4. That surprises me as he allows white to develop massive pressure on the d file, and that was Hikaru's idea. He basically says, yeah, you've got an attack on the d5 pawn, but that pawn is perfectly well protected by the e6 pawn. But I think Hikaru has seriously underestimated Shimanov's last move, f2, f3, essentially forcing a trade of these pawns when white will be threatening the move e3, e4, and that will simply trap the bishop on f5. One of the negative byproducts of the move e76 is that it essentially locks in, it hems in the bishop on f5, and if white can find a way to push this pawn at e4, that bishop is going to be trapped, and there is no easy way to untrap it because the move g5 simply walks into h takes g5, and that is why Shimanov has left his rook on the h file. A very instructive idea. A lot of people would look at this and say, well, what is the rook doing here? It's just staring at its own pawn. Well, sometimes pieces can be placed on a particular location for prophylactic reasons in order to prevent an important move. And here, white is preventing black from opening up a pathway for his bishop with g5. Hikaru, after a long think as he moves his queen towards c8, and essentially he decides that he cannot afford to move the pawn off of e4 because the threat of white playing e4 would have been too strong. Now, does Shimanov accept the pawn sacrifice. My instinct says no. I don't think Shimanov should take on e4 because then opening up the bishop will be a bad idea given Hikaru's pressure on c2. That was an excellent move by Shimanov. Knight b5, and Hikaru is in very, very big trouble. Look at White's knights. Look at all of these weak squares. White's knight is angling its way to d6. White's got control of the d file. Everything in this position is working in Shimanov's favor, including the clock. He's up 30 entire seconds. He's got almost half of his time remaining. Hikaru is on the cusp of losing his 4th round game, and that would be a big, big result. That is not common. Hikaru usually doesn't lose a game in the Title Tuesday ever, but definitely not until the 6th or 7th round. Can Shimanov finish this off? Hikaru down to 39 seconds, and Rook d7 looks totally devastating to me, infiltrating the 7th rank, followed by Knight d6. This is looking really, really bad for Nakamura. Let's very quickly check into some of the other top games. We've got Gawain Jones facing off against Vladimir Fedoseev on board 2. This looks like a relatively colorless position. White's up a pawn, but Fedoseev has some compensation as he sacrifices an exchange and plays bishop h3. This is also a very interesting game. But let's tune back into Hikaru's game because he is still on the verge of losing. Rook d7 by Shimanov. He threatens the move rook f7, which will almost trap the queen. And queen g5 here is an amazing winning move. Look at that move, queen g5. And you can't take the queen because of checkmate on the h file. Will Shimanov find this crushing move? Queen g5 ends the game on the spot here. That's an incredible game. That's an incredible game. That's an incredible move. And it will be an incredible game if he finds that move. That is the quickest win, but it's not the only win. But Shimanov dropping down to 30 seconds. This is how Hikaru does it. He forces his opponent to find incredibly tough moves, and Shimanov doesn't find it, and now he's down on the clock, and Hikaru is somehow recovering here. King b1 by Shimanov, improving the position of his king. It's still really, really bad for black, but now the time situation is close. Hikaru going queen h5, hitting the rook on d1, and potentially eyeing the move g5. Shimanov also struggling with his knight on e5, which is now under a lot of pressure. Rook up to d4. Rook f5 by Hikaru. I feel like Hikaru might actually win this game. Shimanov down to 16 seconds. He doesn't see what to do. He moves his knight back to g4. The rook on d4 was untouchable, but now it has to move. Where does it move? He's got 10 seconds on the clock. He's struggling tremendously. Shimanov down to 8 seconds. He doesn't see what to do as he sacrifices an exchange on g7. That was the best move. And rook takes g7. There's bishop e5. Bishop e5 winning back the exchange. He's got to move, though. He's got 4 seconds. And Hikaru, it doesn't matter how lost he is, he will find a way to create pressure. Rook g8. Rook takes g8 and knight takes h6. But bishop e5 check. Shimanov missing everything here. And now he's no longer better. He has to win back black's rook. Queen d1 check by Hikaru. Queen d5 check, but b3 there. b3 would have been better for white. Instead, he gives him a perpetual bishop d4. White is still better because Hikaru's king is still incredibly weak. Despite the lack of pieces, white still has chances to mate the king as Shimanov going h5, depriving the king of the square. But queen f2 check, I didn't like that. Bishop g7, queen d1 check. Queen takes h5, he blurs a pawn. Hikaru wins a pawn, and now Hikaru's going to win the game. Unbelievable. He forces the queen trade. And Shimanov with a big, big choke there. That was a game he absolutely had to win. But Hikaru, once again, with some absolutely incredible defense. And this should be a win for black now, as the plan of creating a passer on the king side is totally unstoppable. Simply too resilient. He got white low on the clock. And after that, Shimanov just started panicking move after move. Let's check into Kamsky's game. Jeffrey is going to defeat Gata Kamsky. So Gata, the FFL, the famous legend, he meets his match in Jeffrey Zhang, who moves to 4 out of 4. He might face Hikaru. We have Brandon Jacobson winning another game against Alex Rustamov, the veteran grandmaster, and a couple of other games. Here at the top, Vugar Rasulov, a very much household name. He's also on 4 out of 4. We got one more game going. It's Bogdan Diac, Romanian grandmaster, who was held to a draw in the previous round, but he is going to win his game once again and move to 3.5 out of 4 as he defeats Azerbaijani FIDE master Hazar Babazada. We've got a couple of games still going. Andrew Tang, who was held to a draw as well, trying to defeat a Polish, very strong Polish FIDE master. Can he pull it off? He's got rook and knight against the queen. This is a very similar position to what Carlsen had against Nepo, and f7 check was missed. f8 queen and Andrew Tang winning a dead drawn position. All black had to do was check the king and force it back from g6, but in time pressure. These top players, they know exactly how to create chances. And we have David Paravian also on 2 out of 3. He lost a game early. Another queen versus rook and piece. Now, black is the only one with winning chances here. And white's going to flag! Oh, he's going to flag. Unbelievable. And some of the top guys, you know, they're getting their fair share of luck. But you know what Capablanca said? Good players are always lucky. Just 3 more games to go. Leonid Nozdrychov, and Vasily Korchmar on 1.5 out of 3 as they're playing out what should be a pretty much drawn endgame. But why did black go knight d5 check? Because he lets the king infiltrate. He's let the king infiltrate all the way to g8. And now white has the idea of delivering checkmate with rook a7 and rook h7. This should be a win. Knight f6, king f7 or king h8. Maybe king h8 was better. Rook a6, knight e5 check. Black still holding on. Rook b6, knight e5. This still might be a draw. Does white have any way to make inroads here? Rook e7, knight f6 check, king f7 back. We've seen this face before. Rook e6 there. Rook e6. Oh, rook h8 mate! Rook h8 mate! He had a mate in one, but he doesn't do it, but he's still winning. He's still winning. The pawn is going forward, and it's promoting, and it's delivering checkmate. And a very nice technical win here by the international master from Russia. One more game remaining. Another rook versus rook position. Unbelievable how in every round we seem to have exactly one of these. And whenever a rook versus rook position is reached, it seems that neither player wants to agree to a draw. Rook b5 there. Come on, rook b5. Trade those rooks. Trade those rooks. And we will have about a 6-minute break after this round, just for everybody to catch their breaths. We've got 4 rounds of the late title Tuesday in the books. We've still got a pretty big group with 4 out of 4. Okay, we're waiting for this game to finish. This will be probably another 50-move rule. I don't really know who's playing for a win, who's the one declining the draws. It's probably white because he's higher rated, but on the other hand, black had a chance to trade rooks. No, white's the one. Oh my god, black is the one actually trying to play here. That is ridiculous. I mean, there should be some sort of a punishment for doing this. It obviously shouldn't be forfeit because this is not against the rules, but it's sort of borderline ridiculous. King g2. Black is clearly the one trying to push here, which surprises me. Okay, but how many moves have we already had? We've had 151 moves in this game. That's pretty incredible. And when did we enter this endgame? Okay, right around... Yeah, there we go. Just as I started checking, the game ends in a draw. And that concludes round 4 of the late title Tuesday. Let's have a look at the standings before we go on break. We've got exactly 10 people, easy to follow. 10 people with 4 out of 4. Brandon Jacobson, Hikaru Nakamura among them. Hrant Melkumian. Basically almost all of the favorites, including Fedoseev and Jeffrey Zhang, Alexei Sarana on 4 out of 4 as well. So some players have been held to a draw, such as Aram Hakobian. You can see that there's a big contingent with 3.5 out of 4 tailing the 4 out of 4 guys. So nothing has been decided yet. Don't go anywhere because the first 4 rounds are in the books. We've got 7 more exciting rounds of action. And with that, I'm going to go on a very short break, catch my breath. And when we come back, we'll have round 5 of the late title Tuesday. So don't go anywhere. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the late Title Tuesday. 4 rounds. 4 rounds are in the books. Round 5 is underway, and we have already a couple of matchups of Titans. We've got Hrant Melkumian, very strong Armenian Grandmaster, facing off against Hikaru Nakamura on board 1. Hikaru with the black pieces for the second game in a row, a tough pairing. And you can see that he's decided to play the Dutch this tournament, winning a very hard-fought game against Alexander Shimanov in the previous round, a game in which he was worse out of the opening, was getting completely outplayed, and then put out an absolutely incredible resistance, turning the game around and not just pulling out a draw, but actually winning a position that looked absolutely unwinnable. Hrant Melkumian taking a slightly different approach. You could see that Shimanov had a very similar queenside development, but he didn't decide to take on f6. Here, Melkumian deciding to take Hikaru's knight, giving up his dark squared bishop, but damaging black's kingside pawn structure. On the other hand, while this pawn structure may seem optically damaged, it's actually not that bad because he's preventing white from going g4, which would be a great way to open up the kingside. And the move e4 is not as appetizing because it also leads to a trade. But maybe Melkumian could consider move e4. Objectively speaking, you can see by the eval bar, the position is unquestionably better for white. White's got better development, more space. Black's position looks very flimsy, but it's very hard to show anything. And I think that's an approach that Hikaru takes in a lot of these tournaments. He goes for positions that are objectively worse, but that are maybe even easier to play for him as he goes d5, grabbing control of the center, and now preventing black from preventing white from playing e4. And that's a pretty big step forward for Hikaru. If he can get the rest of his pieces out, if he can get his knight out, and he can tuck his king away on the king side, I think black is essentially not even going to be worse. The eval bar is still showing approximately +1. But in this case, I kind of disagree. I think the engine often in this case is over-evaluating the role of a space advantage. But what can actually happen if Hikaru would have castled, there's a crazy tactic here with knight takes h5. And after gh5, queen f5, you simply cannot stop the check on h7, which is also kind of checkmate. A small problem. So Hikaru delaying castles, that is something he probably saw in a millisecond. But Melkumian closing down the queen side and creating a nice pathway for himself to c5. Notice that now taking on h5 is no longer effective because of the move bishop e6. That is why Hikaru put a queen on e7 in order to cover the h7 square. So very savvy defensive move there. But now Melkumian getting a knight to c5, and he continues to wind his tentacles around black's position. The position remains very closed, and I think Hrant wants to reopen it by playing c2, c4. And if he can get rid of black's light squared bishop, the weakness of the g6 pawn is going to really make its presence felt. The other important thing to point out is that this trade on f4 would definitely be in white's favor. It would leave Hikaru with a very bad bishop on f7. The bishop on h6 is one of black's main defensive pieces. So a very tough position here for Hikaru Nakamura. And once again, he has his back to the wall, and Hrant Melkumian is a faster player than Shimanov. So Hikaru's not going to have time pressure to exploit here. He's going to have to defend it on the board as white goes c4, opening up the center, offering a pawn trade and trying to get rid of black's light squared bishop. Now notice that if Hikaru just sort of blindly trades everything, that doesn't work because of knight takes g6 check, forking the king and the queen. So Hikaru might either have to take on f4, or he might have to find a way to refrain from trading on c4 in the first place. And what a defensive move! Knight e5! Knight e5, an incredible move by Hikaru. And the point is, after d-e-f-e, if white's knight moves, black is going to push that pawn down at e4, forking the bishop and the queen. So obviously Hikaru sacrifices a piece temporarily, and he's going to win the piece back by playing e4. That's a very interesting resource. I'm not sure that it totally solves all of black's problems. So white can move the knight over to h3, and then after e4, move the queen over to g3, and then basically get a 2 knights versus 2 bishops position in which black still has a lot of the same weaknesses that he had previously. A lot of these squares, right, g5, f4, e5 can be occupied by white's knights, and black's bishops are still not all that great. So I still think white keeps an advantage, but this is a great way for Hikaru to sort of change the course of the game, to change the dynamic of the position, and to force Melkumian to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what the best version is of giving back the piece, right? Does he play knight h3? Does he leave the knight on f4 and let Hikaru take it with his pawn? All of that takes time, and you can already see Melkumian dropping to 48 seconds on the clock, which is essentially something that you cannot afford against Nakamura. You can also try to take on g6 and take on f5, but this fails to rook f8, pinning the bishop to the queen and winning a piece. So that's something Melkumian also has to spend time refuting as he's now down to 30 seconds. Hikaru is up a full minute on the clock, and he simply cannot decide how to give his piece back. He finally goes knight e2, e4. That's kind of what we expected. Queen to g3, so he doesn't go to h3. He goes to g3. He keeps an eye on the g6 pawn. And after d takes c4, Hikaru is now up a pawn, and I don't like the move knight f4. Knight f4 was a big mistake. He should have played knight e5 and won back the pawn on c4. I have no idea what knight f4 is. And rook takes c4. What an interesting move. Bishop takes c4. He wants to take on g6 with check. But the thing is, Hikaru is not obligated to take that rook as he drops his bishop around to g7, maneuvering it potentially either to f6 or to e5. But a very nice move by Melkumian as he goes knight h3, angling for g5, knifing his way into black's position. Hikaru prevents it with bishop f6. He plays it anyway, and now a desirable trade for white. I feel like Melkumian has stabilized the position at least somewhat, and maybe it's time to plug the d-file with knight d4, and he does. The position looks approximately equal as he moves his rook over to c5. He's trying to open the b-file. The other rook is pining to attack that pawn on b7. Hikaru says no. White doubles on the c-file, supporting the rook on c5. If anything, I would probably prefer Melkumian here. I feel like the knight might be incrementally better than the bishop, and I feel like he's playing for a win. He plays f3, potentially eyeing the move e4, but e4 would mean that the knight on e4 loses its support, so I would not play e4 unless he's absolutely sure that he's ready for it. And look at what Hikaru is doing. He is tripling. He's building Alekhine's gun on the d-file, and it's all in order to prevent the move e4. I feel like the likeliest result now is probably a draw because neither side can really make any progress. Any pawn breaks for both players would probably be too risky, but Melkumian is infiltrating d6 with his queen. He's, I think, still playing for a win. As the smoke is cleared, it looks like white is a better endgame. King moves up to f4. Rook moves up to c5. Melkumian is one of the best endgame players of our generation. I've lost several equal endgames to him. Knight e2, knight c3 as he maneuvers his knight over to c3, attacking the bishop. The bishop moves back. Will he now play e4? No, he goes back to e2, and he remaneuvers the knight to d4. Hikaru moves his bishop back to d5, moving back to c3, and Hikaru now preparing the move b6. I feel like both sides now playing for a win. Melkumian down in 14 seconds. Hikaru is trying to play the move b6 and open up the queen side. He looks at white's clock, and he feels that he has a chance if he can complicate the game to create winning chances, but no, he thinks better of it. He moves his rook back to e8 and now down to e7. This gives Melkumian a chance to play a couple of quick moves and gain some time on the clock. And now c5, and here's Hikaru's winning attempt. He opens up the position. He's trying to go after the a5 pawn. If he can win that pawn, he's going to have connected passers on the queen side. Melkumian doing everything possible to prevent the king from moving on to b4. But bishop b5, closing down the b-file. Melkumian staying put with rook b2. The key thing for white is to keep the b4 square protected. As long as the king can't get to b4, the pawn on a5 is safe, but now he's allowed it, and his idea is to play rook c7 as the position is heating up. This is so interesting. We're not looking at the other games right now, but this is worth it. Okay, king takes a5. Both sides have taken a pawn. Now Melkumian creating a pass pawn of his own, and I feel like white's the one with winning chances. Now look at this. Oh, knight b3 check. Knight b3 check was winning a piece. Oh my god, knight b3 check won a piece. Knight b3, king a4, and knight c5 would have won that bishop, but it still looks like Melkumian is winning as he moves his pawn to e6. Hikaru doing everything he can, taking the pawn on g2, bishop d5, king e5, infiltrating. Hikaru might have to give up his bishop for the pawn. And in that case, white will definitely be winning because white will be left with a pawn on g5. Hikaru has nothing better to do than to give up the bishop, king f6, and Melkumian is completely winning. Can he finish it off? Rook b1, and king f7 is coming. Hikaru pushing his king all the way up to a2, and now will he push his h-pawn? This is not over. a5, it's never over with Hikaru. a6, and knight f4, stopping the pawn. Rook a1, moving the rook around to h1. Now king takes g6. It's over. Now it's completely winning. King takes g6. Hikaru desperately trying to get his king closer to the pawn, but the king is too far away. Knight g5. Knight f3 check. Oh, knight f3 check won the rook, but Melkumian taking the safer route as he goes rook f3 and knight g5, and Hikaru is going to resign the game. What an incredible win for the Armenian Grandmaster, and Hikaru just got too ambitious there. That whole idea of playing c5, Hikaru thought in white's time pressure it was going to pay off. It ends up backfiring, and the game is over, and almost all of the games from the round are over. I'll update you on the standings in just a second. This is the last game of the round. Black is going to win this game, and that will conclude round 5. Wow, what an incredible game. Okay, so this game is over, and the next round is beginning, unless Black promotes. Promoting actually results in stalemate, but a very savvy move by Black there was seeing that and playing f1 queen. Queen f7, it's all over. Queen f3 check, queen g4, and it's easy from here. King f2 and checkmate on the next move. And that concludes round 5. We're halfway through the tournament. Black slow rolling him there. Let's update the standings, and let's see which of the favorites were able to win their 5th game. And we only now have 4 players on 5 out of 5. We've got Big Fish, that's Vladimir Fedoseev, Hrant Melkumian, who vanquished the tournament favorite Hikaru Nakamura. We have Jaspem, Jose Martinez, not a surprise there, and Vugar Rasulov, the Azeri beast, on 5 out of 5. And then a big group on 4.5. Penguin, Jeffrey, Dmitry Kolars, Severomorsky, I think that's Alexander Moisenko, and Bogdan Dech, the young Romanian GM, on 4.5 out of 5, so still nothing has been decided. But the 4 favorites are going to play each other, so let's keep an eye on the top games, including on Hrant Melkumian. We've got a classic matchup here as Jose Martinez is playing Vladimir Fedoseev. They have faced off so many times in Title Tuesday, and this is a very, very big game because the winner is going to move on to 6 out of 6, and as the top has thinned out, the value of each of these games has increased. And on the second board, we've got Vugar Rasulov against Hrant Melkumian. Now, they've got a very quiet, kind of a boring position, so maybe Vugar is just trying to make a quick draw, having seen his opponent's last round result. But we'll still keep an eye on this game. Hikaru, his reward for losing round 5 is to play Penguin, Andrew Tang. So that's not going to be an easy game as well. Hikaru will try to rebound, and he also lost an early game in the previous Title Tuesday, but rebounded to score 9.5 out of 11 and win the tournament. So nothing has been fully decided yet. On board 3, we've got Jeffrey Zhang with the white pieces against Dmitry Kolars, both of these players with 4.5 out of 5. Another game to keep an eye on. But let's go back to board 1. Let's go back to Jose Martinez against Vladimir Fedoseev. Okay. So what do we have going on here? We have a Caro Kann, which almost looks like a French. We've got typical kind of French pressure on the d4 pawn. A very strange setup by Jose, who's already played the move g4, which is obviously kind of weakening, but black doesn't have any pieces developed on the king side to exploit that. And knight a4 was a really nice move, chasing the queen away from b6 and simultaneously protecting the b2 pawn. Now, will Jose take on c5? If he takes on c5 with a knight, what's likely to happen is bishop c5, dc, and knight takes c5. Yes, white's gotten rid of a very important bishop, but white's got a lot of other problems to deal with. Knight f3 check is the big threat. g4 is hanging. Let's see how Jose tries to solve these problems. No, so knight c5, knight takes e5 immediately was Fedoseev's choice. He doesn't take on c5 first, and that's just another way of using tactics to win back the pawn castle's queenside. The one reason I'm a little bit skeptical about this from black's perspective is because white has control of this very important d4 square. The d4 square can be used as a blockading point for the knight or for the bishop. So I feel like white is probably for choice here as he shoves his pawn down to f4. Another important detail was that you couldn't have taken the e5 pawn because the bishop would have hung. And if you take the bishop on e3, then white takes back with a queen and protects the e5 pawn. So everything tactically working out here for Jose. Fedoseev, though, look at what he did there. He went h5, disrupting the coordination of white's kingside pawns. G takes h5, knight e7. The point is not that this is a pawn trade. The point isn't even to recapture the pawn. The point is to get the f5 square for the knight. He does recapture the pawn, but that gives white a chance to develop with tempo. But Jose deciding to tuck his king away onto a safer square, very typical move when you've castled queenside, and now bishop a6, developing the bishop with tempo. I think Fedoseev might have missed that move. It's not the end of the world, but it forces the rook to move again. Now the bishop drops back to e2, chasing the other rook away. It moves up to h3, attacking and pressuring the bishop on e3. Is rook takes e3 and knight f5 a threat here? Well, it's not so much a threat as an annoying idea, and Jose prevents it by playing bishop g4. The bishop now controls the f5 square. White is definitely in charge here. He's got a big initiative. He's got control in the center, and black's king. It might not look dangerous right now, but if white manages to put something on the g-file or play the move f4, f5, there will be hell to pay for the black king as Fedoseev moves his rook back to c8, trying to stack the queen and the rook and create pressure on white's c2 pawn, but the queen on d2 doing a great job of defending that pawn. And here it is, rook hg1, eyeing the g5 pawn, and g5 by Fedoseev. What a brazen move. Shoving that pawn up to g5. It's immediately captured by Jose. And if Fedoseev takes on e5 here, what is white's idea? If queen takes e5, it's happened. I think the simple rook de1 leads to a situation in which black has so many weaknesses in the center. It might not look visually that bad, but look at black's king. It has nowhere to go. It can't castle anymore because black's moved both of his rooks. Look at the pressure that white has on f7. The queen on e5 may look intimidating, but it can actually be attacked by a lot of different pieces, by potentially a knight that drops back to f3. And that is why I think Jose should put a rook on e1 in order to protect the bishop on e3. Now knight f3 is a very big threat. That forks the queen and the rook. So everything is hanging here. It just feels like black's position is on the verge of falling apart. There are all sorts of discovered attacks that are being threatened right now. Knight takes e6 is another huge threat, followed by bishop takes c5. Fedoseev dropping on the clock as he moves back to c7, and here it is, knight f5. Bang, bang, bang. And if he takes f5, bishop takes c5 is a check. Look at how Jose has positioned his rooks. He's positioned them perfectly. And if the rook moves back to h8, there's a very nasty check on g7 as well. Rook h7 might be the best move here, but even rook takes d5 could be considered. He plays rook h7. It's forced. It's not totally over yet. Fedoseev, for the moment, holding his position down, but it just seems like Jose is on the cusp of delivering a knockout blow. Let's see if he manages. As he plays knight h6, shoving that knight into a very nice outpost and attacking f7 with everything that he's got. As Fedoseev trying to throw water onto the fire, moving his queen to f4, offering a queen trade that I would imagine Jose will decline. How will he decline it? Rook f3 seems to be the natural move as he takes f7. He might stack his pieces on the f-file. Rook df1 looks very natural to me because currently the knight is hanging, and he does play rook df1, and now he's got all sorts of threats. Knight e5 is probably the biggest threat because knight takes e5 gets mated on f8. How does black defend here? I don't see a single move. In the meantime, board 2. Actually, Vugar Rasulov is outplaying Hrant Melkumen. He's up a pawn in a rook endgame, so this is another game to keep an eye on. But our top game is the most interesting one, as Jose tries to deliver the crushing blow, and here it is, 95. Fedoseev missed it, and it's over. 95 wins the game. If you take it, you get mated. If you don't take it, white either takes the rook or the knight. Knight takes g6 is the best move here. Knight takes knight. Okay. This is good enough. Rook f7 here is winning. Knight takes g6 and rook f8 check is winning. He goes queen g3, which is maybe not the most accurate, but it's a completely winning position. I would go rook f8 and queen a3 mate. That's a mate threat. Look at that. Am I allowed to say sexy? That is a sexy mate threat. Queen a3 is coming, and Fedoseev allows it graciously, and Jose Martinez up to 6 out of 6 with another incredible performance against Fedoseev, who has won so many Title Tuesdays. He is a very hard player to beat, especially in that manner. And we're watching board 2 as our second pair of players with perfect scores battles it out in a rook endgame, king h4. Melkumen desperately trying to create counterplay on the king side, but look at white's pawns. White is currently up a pawn, and he's the one with connected passers, but Melkumen is making a lot of progress on the king side. This is anybody's game. King h3, and Melkumen is going to win the h2 pawn, but who's faster? Rook a2. He doesn't rush to take it. He wants to take it with the king, and then he wants to shove that g pawn down the board. Rook b5, threatening checkmate on h5, and also threatening rook a5. What does black do here? If h4, then white goes rook a5, putting the rook between black's rook and white's pawn. Rook a1 check by Melkumen. King f2. Now h4 was the drawing move. Rook a2 check. They're repeating moves. King e2. But wait a second. Now the same problem. Rook takes a2. Rook takes h5 check. It isn't checkmate anymore because black has the g2 square. But now white is left with it past an extra pawn on b4. Can he move this pawn up to promotion, or will black find a way to win white's h2 pawn and create sufficient counterplay to draw? Apparently king d3 was a mistake according to the engine. Rook a3 check and rook h3 was the drawing sequence, but he misses it and he lets the pawn go forward to b5. Now white is winning. That pawn is too fast. It's too lethal, and black just doesn't have time to win the h2 pawn. The king is up to c5. It's supporting the pawn. He's moving it forward. He's going to win the game. He's going to win the game. Rook c5. Beautiful. Rook c2 check and b6. And look at how white repositions his rook to defend the pawn laterally. And now his pawn is up to b6. Black has absolutely nothing that he can do against b7 and king c7. You can get rid of the rook, but you have no way of winning the h2 pawn. And Vugar Rasulov will face off against Jose Martinez in the most pivotal game of this late Title Tuesday, with both players on 6 out of 6. What an incredible sequence here. And Jeffrey Zhang on board 3, he's drawn his game against German Grandmaster Dmitry Kolarz. Bogdan Deac also was on 4.5 out of 5. He beat Alexander Moisenko, and we have only a couple of games still remaining. Just trying to update, let you guys know which games are still being played. We've got Sergei Zhigalko. He's done. I'm pretty sure that all of the games are over. Okay, round 7 actually has begun. And let's update the standings, and I'll let you guys know what's going on at the top. We've got 2 players with 6 out of 6. We've got 1 player with 5.5. That's Bogdan Dech, as you can see. And then we have a massive contingent with 5 out of 6 that include Hikaru, who did, in fact, defeat Andrew Tang, rebounding to get himself onto into the top 10. So we're going to keep an eye on Hikaru's attempt to recover from that painful loss to Hrant Melkumian, as well as the top game between Jose Martinez and Vugar Rasulov, who are our only remaining perfect scores. Let's check that game out in just a moment here. I'm going to clean this up a little bit and then pull up that game. Okay, there we go. So that game is in a very peaceful position. We have a Bogo Indian kind of structure where we've got the pawns on d6 and b6. It looks pretty nice for Jose. I feel like he's totally equalized. It's a pretty symmetrical position. And very often in these kind of situations, black strikes on the queen side with c5 in order to prevent white from playing c5 himself. On the other hand, you can allow c5, and then you can claim that you've got the d5 square for your knight. So it's a very equal position. Anything can happen here. The next couple of moves are going to define a lot, and Jose does decide to play c5, so he prevents further progress of white's queenside pawns. This is the kind of position in which some grandmasters would basically agree to a draw. It's very symmetrical. Queen b7, creating a battery on the long diagonal, discouraging white's knight from moving away. White can still go knight e1 and offer the trade of bishops, but I wouldn't say that that trade favors anybody in particular. He does play knight e1. Jose is probably going to trade bishops and put something on d8, and he does that as well. This game is hurtling toward a draw. I feel like that is by far the likeliest result. Queen e4, centralizing the queen. Jose doing a great job here of contending for maybe even a slight edge after the move rook d8 to d4. Rook d4 looks like a very nasty move, because if white takes the rook, black takes back with a pawn, forcing that knight off of e3, and Jose, slowly but surely, is developing a pretty serious initiative as he contends for control of the d-file. Rook f to d8 is the next, and then everything is going to be nicely centralized. He's going to be threatening to trade twice on d1 and win the c4 pawn, because that queen is making contact with the c4 pawn. Vugar advances his rook up to d2, preparing to double his own rooks. And now we've got a big-time standoff on the d-file as Jose moves his h-pawn up to h5. Another excellent move. Another excellent move. And it's stopped by h4, but now that's more weaknesses on the queen side. On the king side, rather, for white. But can Jose make any progress? Can Jose make any progress in this position? He's got a very nice-looking position, right? He's got his queen on e4. He's got his rook on d4. Everything is positioned perfectly. But what does he do now? White has managed to defend everything for the time being. The engine doesn't even seem to find any good ways to make progress. And it's not a surprise that Jose is taking his time, trying desperately to figure out whether he can pose any problems. He goes rook 8 d7, a4 by Vugar, continuing to improve his own position, protecting the b5 square, the b5 pawn rather. And I almost feel like this might end in a draw. Just if Jose doesn't find any ways to test white to make any progress, he might just have to go back and forth here. Kind of an interesting position. He goes e5. So he grabs more space in the center. I think that's a pretty good start. But white can also just play queen c3 and stay put. That's probably what's going to happen. Perhaps the reason Jose played e5 is in order to be able to move this queen back to g6. That's why I think he played e5. I think he wants to move his queen back to g6 and make space for his knight to jump into e4. And if he can do that, he might force white to take on d4. B takes a5. Vugar has given up another pawn. Now he's destroyed. Oh, rook takes d2. No, he had a win. He had a win on the spot. He could have taken d2, then given a check on b1, and then thrown the knight into e4, forking the queen and the rook. And the fact that he's played h5 is incredibly helpful because rook d7 is no longer dangerous. Black has luft for his king on h7. So Jose missing an immediate win, but he's still much better. Queen a5, king h7 in the meantime has been played. I still feel like Jose might win this game. That move a4, a5 by Rasulov was very impatient. And now he's tied himself up with another problem, namely the pawn on a4. So he moves his rook up now to d3, making sure that it's protected by a pawn and giving his queen the freedom to take on a4. But Can Jose trade on d3 and simply take twice? I guess at the end of the line, white will be able to take on a7 with his queen, and this is happening, and I don't like this. Queen takes a7. Oh, he plays queen takes a4 first, so he eliminates the most dangerous passed pawn. And the problem for Jose, even though he's a pawn up, is that he's got these two major weaknesses on the queen side, and white's got the more active queen, even though visually it looks like black's queen is the one that's more far advanced. But notice the role that the knight on e3 is playing. It's playing an incredible role defensively. It's guarding a lot of important squares. d1, g4. It's also eyeing the d5 score. So the moment black's knight moves away from f6, white's knight can jump into d5, and that is a massive outpost. So I just don't feel like Jose can make too much progress here despite his extra pawn. But we'll keep an eye on this game. Let's have a very quick look at some of the other top games. We've got Hikaru Nakamura on one of the top boards as well, continuing his comeback attempt. He's playing Bogdan Deac, so he is playing the only player with 5.5 out of 6. And they've got a very tense position. I feel like Deac is in charge here. He's got a massive pawn on d6. Both players now down to 30 seconds or so. Hikaru chasing away the knight with the move g6. Now knight takes h6 check is probably to be preferred. But then that knight could actually land in a lot of trouble. Deac down to 20 seconds as he puts his knight on e7. And now he can take on h6. He should take on h6, and he does. And knight c5 by Hikaru, getting his knight into the game. And is there bishop back to g5 as he takes on b6? Hikaru immediately attacking the queen with rook e6, going after white's clock. Back to b5 goes Deac. Knight takes a4 by Hikaru. A lot of pawns being captured. Who's going to prevail here? Rook a1 attacking the knight and essentially forcing a queen trade because Hikaru cannot take on b2. That's currently defended by white's queen. He has to trade queens first. He can also drop his knight back to b6. That might be an option worth considering. Okay, Hikaru is definitely worse here. He's got a lot of weaknesses on the dark squares. The material count, currently white is up a pawn. So no question that Deac is much better. And now he's up a pawn. I apologize. No, he's up 2 pawns. He's actually up 2 pawns. But the only thing that works in Hikaru's favor here, first of all, white's clock. Second of all, look at white's queen. White's queen is trapped, and he's had to give it away for the knight. But he gives it away for a knight and a rook. And white still has 2 extra pawns. So Deac is still playing for a win here, despite having a rook and a bishop for a queen. He has 2 pawns on top of that, and white's Hikaru's king is also incredibly weak on the dark squares. Bishop d4. If white can get bishop d4 in, that will be incredibly nasty, even if it comes without the fork. So rook b to d1 and bishop d4 is the plan here as Hikaru drops his queen to f6, rook c1, trading a pair of rooks. Now black's queen is tied down to the c-pawn. Deac is playing for a win here. Rook d6. This should still be a draw because white's king is going to be permanently weak. But Deac driving his pawn up to c6. He might win this game. Rook d7 check, king e6. Can he make progress? He's down to 4 seconds. King back to g1. Hikaru repeating moves. King up to h2 again. Can Deac find a win here with no time on the clock? Bishop d4 attacking f6. And now f5, rook f6 check, and he's going to win another pawn. He's going to win another pawn, and he should be winning here. c7 first, though. Why is he giving up the pawn? He shouldn't have given that up first. Oh, f4, and he's going to lose. Or is he going to lose? Rook g7 check and bishop d4. Oh, my goodness, this is an unbelievable choke. Rook d7, and he has to be very careful not to lose his rook. He has to be incredibly careful here not to lose his rook to a4. Don't go to h3. And Hikaru, look how tricky. Look how tricky he's playing. Rook f6, queen e4, and he's going to lose the bishop. But is this a loss? This is probably still a draw. This is probably still a draw because black has no way to make progress here. That rook on f4 is a hero. It is guarding everything. It's stopping black's king from making any progress. And now white just goes back and forth with his king. But can Hikaru induce Zugzwang? The one thing Hikaru can try to do is create a situation where white has no other moves other than to move his rook. But I don't think such a situation can be induced because white's king has too many possible moves. So Deac, by the skin of his teeth, holding a draw here. But what an incredible sequence of events. Back to Jose's game. That game, as we expected, ended in a draw as well. So we're going to have a 2 players now on 6.5 out of 7. Hikaru is held to another draw. He's on 5.5 out of 7. And a big group, I assume, on 5.5 and 5. We've got a couple more games remaining. We've got Dmitry Andreikin, who lost that early game. He's making a big comeback as he defeats S.L. Naryanan for another point. We've got just a couple of games remaining. And let's see. We've got one game here with both players on 4 out of 4. Another situation with, oh, he's going to flag. And Kurtunen finish IM. He flags another rook versus rook. And the funny thing is, the guy, Milinov, he was the one who perpetuated the rook versus rook in a previous round. So he is notorious for getting rook versus rook and then not accepting a draw. I don't know why he does it. And he's clearly the lower rated player here, but hopefully this game ends pretty soon. We've got one other game remaining. Okay, no, this is the last game. This is the last game. And of course, it's going to last forever because the guy refuses to accept the draw. And there we go, 50 move rule. And finally, the game ends. And round 8 is upon us. This tournament moving at a blistering pace. Now, I remind you, there is another fair play break after round 8. So after the next round, we will go on another very short break just to let everybody have a breath and to check fair play as we move toward the end of the tournament. Let's review once again, update and review our standings after round 7 as round 8 begins. Okay. So we've got 2 players, as mentioned, on 6.5 out of 7. They have just played each other. They made a draw, Jose and Vugar Rasulov. A frustrating game for Jose, who was definitely winning. He was winning on the spot in one moment. In a big group in second place, tied for third place. We've got a big group on 6 out of 7. That includes Dmitry Andreikin, who lost that early game, but won all of his other games since. And Hikaru Nakamura is on 5.5 out of 7, so he's still very much in the conversation, but he's going to have to basically go perfect in the last 4 rounds if he wants a serious shot at winning the tournament, or at least in getting into the top 3. Okay, let's go back to the games. Obviously, because Jose and Vugar have already played each other, they are going to drop down and play some of the top guys with 6. So Jose, in this case, is playing Dmitry Andreikin with the white pieces. And Vugar Rasulov drops down to play Daniel Dubov with the black pieces. So let's keep an eye on this game. It's already in an endgame. And Dubov seems to be putting a lot of pressure on Rasulov here. The material is equal, but there's very nasty pressure down the long diagonal. Bishop b7, guarding the knight on d5. Dubov's knight can migrate over to f5 in order to attack the bishop on e7, but then the bishop can move over to f6. So the question to me is, can this knight on d5 be exploited? Can the pin against the bishop on b7 be exploited? And Dubov finding a very nice way to neutralize Black's strong bishop on f6. No question in my mind that Dubov is better here. Something has gone wrong for Vugar Rasulov early in this endgame. Dubov just threatening to take on f6 and ruin Black's kingside pawn structure. Rook a to d8. He has no choice but to allow that. And Dubov with a big advantage here. No. Rook a d8 was a very tricky move. What Black actually wants to take back with a knight, that is a really tricky idea. And the rook on d8 attacks the knight on d4. That is why Rasulov put his rook on d8. So he is not going gentle into that good knight. And Dubov realizes that, taking his time. He can also get his own rook into the game with rook ac1. He can also move his knight out of d4, out of the x-ray of Black's rook with knight f5. And he does knight f5, creating also ideas with a later knight e7 check. So for example, if Black were to trade on e5, White would be threatening to take twice on d5 and follow that up with knight e7 check. So a very tricky position here for Vugar Rasulov to defend. You can see the eval bar is confirming that. A pretty sizable advantage for White here as Rasulov tries to find a way to hold everything together. Bishop back to c8. That's probably a good move, attacking the knight on f5 and trying to get as many trades as possible to relieve the pressure on the position. Let's check into our second game. We've got Jose against Dmitry Andreikin, and they had a very peaceful position. They're trading all of the pieces. This should be a pretty quick draw. So Jose deciding to play a solid game against Andreikin. Can't really blame him. Andreikin is one of the strongest players on the site. He's won countless title Tuesdays. He's an incredibly hard player to beat. Queen a6, dropping the queen to the side. Material is currently equal, and it's going to stay equal because after rook takes d8, queen c8 check forces repetition with queen f8, queen e6 to follow. Time for a sip of coffee. Jose offered a draw, and I think it very well might be accepted by Dmitry. I just don't see any way to create winning chances here. So a draw agreed in this game. Not a bad result for either player. Jose moves to 7 out of 8. Dmitry will be on 6.5 out of 8. This makes the other top game even more crucial. If Dubov can win this game and knock out Vugar Rasulov, then there's going to be a big group on top with 7 out of 8. And this is looking bad for Vugar. He's about to lose the c-pawn. Look at how many times White is attacking it, and Black is only defending it once. There is no way to defend the c-pawn. Dubov is going to win that pawn, and I think he's going to grind Vugar down in the resulting endgame. This is not over. I mean, White is only up a pawn, but the problem is that he's got this pawn majority on the queen side. He's got the 2-on-1, and in this situation, with the center being as open as it is, the bishop is definitely better than the knight. The bishop can monitor the queen side and the king side at the same time. Rook up to c7, attacking both pawns at the same time. This should be a technically winning position for Dubov, but I would put this at about 70-30. Vugar is obviously a very resilient player, and he's going to try his best to hold this endgame and trade as many pawns as possible. So we'll keep an eye on this game. Let's take a look at Hikaru Nakamura's game. He's fighting from behind on 5.5 out of 7. There's a big group on 5.5 out of 7. Okay, I am doing my best to pull up his game. He's playing Lichnarski, FIDE master from Poland, and a very sharp position for Hikaru, but black with 10 seconds. There's no way he pulls it out. With 10 seconds against Hikaru in a sharp middle game, that you can bid any chances goodbye, but clearly Lichnarski has played a very nice game. He's got quite the initiative going on the queen side, but look at his clock. He's down to 2 seconds, and they haven't even traded queens yet, so there's no question in my mind that Hikaru will find a way to spice up the position and trick his opponent. E5, though, very nice move, striking in the center. Hikaru is up a pawn, but black's compensation is very obvious. He's got very active pieces, and Hikaru has this jumble of pieces on the queen side, all of which are kind of passive. Knight d5 so far. Lichnarski playing very well in time pressure, but you can see the eval bar beginning to creep up as Hikaru starts to consolidate his position and consolidate his extra pawn. We have a trade on c3. Hikaru centralizing his bishop and eyeing the f7 pawn. Rook takes a3, winning back the pawn, but the problem is that this f7 pawn is under massive attack, and now rook c2. Rook c2 is a brilliant move that leads to checkmate, and it's going to lead to a king hunt. Rook c2, queen takes c2. Queen f7, king h7, queen g8, king h6. Hikaru plays it. Let's see where the win is. Oh, that is beautiful. Queen h4. That is just nasty. Look at that move. Queen h8 to h4. That was the critical move that he had to see. And the king is busted here. g5, queen takes g5 is checkmate. Hikaru wins his game in very, very stylish fashion. Back we go to the Vugar-Rasulov game against Daniil Dubov. Can Dubov grind this out? And I think the answer is still a resounding yes. He's now transformed his material advantage from a 2-on-1 on the king-queen side to a 3-on-1 on the king side. On the flip side, Vugar does now have a trump card, and that's the passed a pawn, but he's about to end up 2 pawns down, and Dubov can simply stop the pawn from behind with the rook from a6. This is a completely winning position at this point, and now Vugar doesn't even have a time advantage either. Rook e2 attacking black's bishop, Dubov defending it with his king. Don't go rook a6 now. There's a knight on b4 that's guarding that square, but he goes rook h5, repositioning the rook to a5 and evading the knight's grasp. Rook a5, stopping the pawn, and now he's going to rumble his own pawns up the board. h4 advancing, infiltrating, winning. King f4, a3. Vugar trying his best to push his pawn all the way forward, but a2 doesn't work because of rook takes a2, followed by bishop d5 check, and so Vugar moves his king out of the way. a2, it's a pawn race, it's a game. Rook b1, no, rook b1, there's rook takes a2 again, and that trick with rook takes a2 wins the game. It means Vugar has to waste another tempo. But h7, there's actually rook takes f2 check, so it's not over yet. Dubov moves his king back. Very careful technique, king g2, and now it's over. h7 is unstoppable, and Daniil Dubov with a huge win, the biggest win of the tournament for him. Rook takes c8 and h8 queen as he lands, as he ends up a rook, and he's going to deliver the checkmate here. Rook c7 and queen e7 is mate, and there it is. Daniil Dubov winning his game, a critical round 8 win as he moves to 7 out of 8, and we are indeed going to have a very big group on 7 out of 8. I will tell you who that group includes as soon as the games end. I think the games are pretty much all over. Yeah. Oh, let me just refresh the games here. Okay, we've got a couple of games still remaining. Melkumian, who was an early leader, really dropped off the map. He lost 2 in a row, and he now sits on 5 out of 7, not really sitting pretty. As that just happens in Title Tuesday. You start really well, then you face 2 absolute beasts, and doesn't take anything to lose 2 games. He's playing Rustamov. This is going to be a draw. Melkumian doing his best to create winning chances, but all he's doing is increasing the possibility that he loses after h6. Oh my goodness. And now he's going to have to struggle to make a draw here. He's just going to have to give a bunch of lateral checks. Rook f2 by Rustamov. Now Rustamov is the one playing for a win. And Melkumian down in 2 seconds. He loses f6. And he might actually lose a 3rd game in a row. How unfortunate for Mr. Melkumian. Rook takes g5. But rook takes g5 was winning. Rook takes g5 and rook a5. Instead, rook a5. Rook a5 now is winning. Rook a5, rook takes g5, and he's got the king cut off laterally. Instead, Rustamov not going for this line. Rook takes g5 and rook a5. And then g5, he goes rook f5. That's also good. He has the king cut off. This is not an easy win, though. And Makumian almost flagging there. Will white go g5? No, he goes back to f8, king e6. This is now probably a draw. And king e7, an excellent move, counterattacking the rook. Now Malkumian might be able to save the game. There are only 2 games remaining. This is one of them. And after king f6, this is now a dead draw. He's gotten his king to the promised land, and now it's all very easy. Okay. So Malkumian with a really unfortunate couple of rounds as he's no longer in the conversation. This is a dead draw. You don't even need the Philidor position with a g-pawn because white literally cannot make any progress whatsoever. This is a draw. In our last game is also a rook endgame and also a draw by repetition. And Sasha Rustamov is about to repeat moves and acquiesce to the draw. Okay, he's still playing, but this is obviously a dead draw. Black just gives endless lateral checks. Just don't go king e3 and rook e1 check, forcing the rook trade, followed by king g6, and the game officially ends in a draw. And that means 8 rounds are in the books, ladies and gentlemen, here in the late title Tuesday. Let's review the standings once again before going on our second fair play break. Okay, so in our standings here we can see, and it's just going to update in just a moment. Okay, it should update in a moment. If not, I'll refresh. But basically, we have a big group with 7 out of 8. I'm going to refresh just to get the standings to update. Oh, apologize for that. Oh, okay, not sure why it's doing that. Okay, I will get the standings for you through the main. Okay, here we go. Let's just do it through the main scene. All right. Yeah, not sure why the standings aren't displaying, but I will fix that, ladies and gentlemen. Basically, we have a big group of 7 out of 8. We have Daniel Dubov, Jose Martinez, David Paravian, who's actually won a couple of games, and then Sergey, that's a Russian international master. Hikaru Nakamura on 6.5 out of 8, so he's following very close behind. But in the meantime, we're going to go on a quick fair play break, just a couple of minutes, guys, and I will fix the standings in the meantime. So I'll see you on the other side of the break. We've got 1, 2, 3 more critical rounds to decide the winner of the late title Tuesday. I will see you in just a couple of minutes. Okay, we're back. Back at the late title Tuesday. And the games of round 9 are underway. Okay. The standings issue has been fixed. So you should now see the full standings on display. And we have a crazy game on the top board between David Paravian and Daniel Dubov. I remind you, as you can see in the standings window, that we have a pretty big contingent. We've got 5 players on 7 out of 8. Hikaru Nakamura trailing very close behind on 6.5 out of 8. A couple of people on 6.5, including the former leader, Vugar Rasulov. And a ridiculous position here between Paravian and Dubov. Dubov has sacrificed a rook in a Sveshnikov, but look at the attack that he has against White's king. He's threatening to take on c3 with check and drive the king out into the center with king e2. Pinning, winning, capturing, checking, mating. So many ideas here. According to the engine, the only move for White here, the only move not to lose, is the very calm bishop e2, which makes a lot of sense. Bishop e2 vacates the f1 score for the queen, but will Paravian be able to play such an incredibly calm move? And if Dubov takes on c3, he'll actually be worse. So after bishop e2, the line is bishop d2 check. That's a crazy move, nutty move. Queen d2 loses the rook in the corner. After king f1, a3, it's a wild position that I won't even try to evaluate. Black has incredible compensation for the rook. The engine gives a small advantage for White, but obviously that is totally and utterly meaningless. I love Dubov's opening choice. And finally, David Paravian does play bishop e2. It took him a while, but he found the move. He's down to a minute 50, and Dubov takes on c3. He rushed that. And the reason that queen takes c3 is wrong is because it actually helps White. Why does it help White? Because it helps White tuck the king into a relatively safe square, which unties White's hands and allows him to focus on evacuating his knight. And if White can evacuate his knight and consolidate, obviously, let's not forget that David is up a rook. The move h2, h4 here would counterattack the bishop on g5 and open up a potential pathway for White's rook through h3. So h4 here is the only move to preserve an advantage, but will David find it? What an incredible game we have brewing here. Let's have a quick look-see at some of the other top games. We've got Jose facing off against Alexander Shimanov, and they are already in an opposite colored bishop endgame. So this game looks like it's hurtling furiously toward a draw. Material is equal as well. So this is not a game that we have to keep an eye on too carefully. I think this will be a dead draw. And on board 3, we've got Hikaru Nakamura, who's on 6.5, facing the lowest rated player with 7, who is International Master Sergey from Russia. Very strong player. And a very complicated position as Hikaru has managed to get a protected passed pawn on the king side. Look at that pawn on g4, which would be an incredibly powerful trump card in any endgame. So Hikaru wants to trade the queens here because that pawn on g4 is going to make its presence felt. Sergey is going to try to keep the queens on the board and play in the center and against Hikaru's biggest weakness, which is the pawn on d5. It's isolated, and you can see the kind of pressure that White is putting on that pawn with his knight and his queen. Rook takes f6 in some positions is not out of the question as Hikaru drops his knight back to c7, clearly trying to get this pawn on d5 as well protected as possible. Rook f5 by Sergey, driving his rook up to f5 and potentially over to g5 in order to pin the bishop. I would be very uncomfortable here with black. Hikaru moves his queen to e6, a square formerly occupied by the knight, attacking the rook. Now White has to choose between rook df1 and rook g5. Rook g5 looks very tempting to me because it creates another pin against the bishop. It threatens moves like knight g6, and that knight is jumping all across the board, chiseling its way, knifing its way into black's position as Hikaru taking his time. He drops to a minute 20. This is very, very complicated. Hikaru obviously cannot afford another loss. He can't even afford another draw if he wants to stay in contention for winning the tournament as he moves his knight back to d7, offering a trade of knights, but that was disliked by the engine, and it was precisely because of this reason. Rook takes oh, no, he couldn't have taken because it was check. I thought that this wins because of the fork on e7, but this is actually check. Incredibly well spotted by Hikaru, but instead Sergey is not fooled as he moves back to f4. He takes on d5, and he's got a big initiative here, but apparently that was not correct. Now Hikaru can take on g5, and you've got a wild position where now black is going to have 2 passed pawns on the king side, but White has finally managed to eliminate black's biggest weakness. Knight b6 though by Hikaru. He moves closer and closer to a queen trade, and we already know what happens in the event of a queen trade. We already know who benefits, and it is not White, it is black, because regardless of the pawn count, black is the one with a far advanced protected passers on the king side. And can Sergey avoid a queen trade here? I don't think he can. Well, if he takes the knight on b6, Hikaru takes the queen on b3 and then recaptures. He can give a check on e7. That looks cool, but there is absolutely no follow-up after king f8. Hikaru is going to win this game because white will have to acquiesce to the queen trade. And although the engine doesn't seem to indicate that this is totally lost, from a practical perspective, I don't see Sergei holding down Hikaru's protected passers. So this looks like a win for Hikaru, and it will be a pivotal win going into the last 2 rounds of the tournament. Knight f4. Sergei dropping his knight back to f4, a great practical chance, because now if Hikaru trades queens, then he wouldn't have been able to hold both of his pawns at the same time. So a great resource by Sergei. He finds a way to keep the queens on the board. Okay, b5, supporting the knight, but now rook h1. Rook h1 looks like a very nasty move. It would have gone after the h5 pawn. I thought he should have played rook h1. Instead, he goes queen d3, so he covers this diagonal, making sure that Hikaru doesn't have a nasty check on f5. Hikaru continues to push. Here come the pawns. h4, g3 might be coming. Here it is. But rook h1, Hikaru cannot defend the h4 pawn. And the other pawn is being held down by the knight. Can Hikaru keep his protected passers alive? I don't think he can. And if white eliminates one of the pawns, then the other pawn is a lot likelier to follow suit. Sergei might actually be better here, and the eval bar seems to bear that out as Hikaru drops to below 30 seconds. Will he lose this game? Will Sergei keep his lead with a win over Hikaru Nakamura as he drops to 23 seconds? He goes 95, attacking the queen. You can't take it because of the pin, but simply queen e4 and queen c4. One final attempt by Hikaru to create chances against white's king. You still can't take the knight because of the pin against white's queen. He's threatening queen takes b4. Sergei takes on h4, but he's given up a check on e1. He's given up a check on e1, and Hikaru, I think, now has perpetual check. But he's not satisfied by perpetual. Hikaru needs to find a way to create winning chances because he is 1/2 point behind all of the leaders. But can he do anything other than give perpetual? I don't think so. I think Hikaru Nakamura has no choice but to acquiesce to the draw, and he does. Bishop c1. He's got 10 seconds on the clock. Rook c8 allows a check on d5, I think. So that's out of the question. Hikaru taking his time here, trying to figure out a way to do it. He can't, and a good result for Sergei. Back to our top board we go. We have drop stone. That's Paravian against Dubov, and Dubov is winning. Daniel Dubov is going to win the game and get up onto the lead. That Sveshnikov rook sacrifice paid off 100-fold. He's up 2 pawns in a rook endgame. This isn't even close. This isn't even close. Just take it in h4. And this is an easy win, right? Even with pawns, those endgame buffs among you will know that even pawns on H and G files are winning. Oh, and he blunders the rook, trying one last dirty move before resigning. And Daniel Dubov moves to 8 out of 9 with 2 rounds to go. It looks like he will be in clear first because Sergei drawing his game. Enjal, that's Aram Hakobian, drawing his game as well. So nobody is on 8 out of 9 except Daniel Dubov. The only person who can catch him is Jose Martinez, who has made it 2. He missed made it 2. Oh my God. And Martinez has found a way in that opposite colored bishop endgame, which we thought was a dead draw. He's found a way to create massive winning chances, but he just missed mate in 2 a couple of moves ago. This is unbelievable, but he's still much better, and he should still be able to win the game. As Shimanov now down to 2 seconds, he's losing, he's hemorrhaging all of his pawns. Rook takes f2, and Jose Martinez is going to catch Daniel Dubov, despite missing mate in 2. What an incredible endgame display, and the mate in 2 was a little bit earlier. He had rook h6, king g3, rook h3 checkmate, but it doesn't matter. He wins the game anyway, and I apologize. Correction, 2 players are on 8 out of 9, Daniel Dubov and Jose Martinez, and I don't remember if they've played. I don't think they have. And Andrew Tang on 7.5 out of 9 together with Aram Hakobian and Sergei, Hikaru's opponent. We've got only a couple of games still remaining. Kamsky is going to win his game to move on to 6 out of 9, but he is out of contention still. Always impressive to see the man, the myth, the legend, Kamsky doing well. That leaves us with only 3 games. An interesting endgame here. 2 players with 5 points out of 8. F8, queen, king takes b6. Can white hold a draw here? Maybe. King b7. Oh, white can actually win this. How does black stop the pawn? a5, a6 is coming. Oh my God, what a crazy game. And white's going to win. a6, and white's winning. Incredible turnaround here. Black is forced to give up the bishop, and he's going to lose the b4 pawn. And Arrigo 07 with a tragic loss there. Leaves us with 2 more games. We got a knight versus rook. That's going to take a while. And we've got never, ever again. Okay, now this is ridiculous. Black is not resigning, and white's building up the clock, and he can potentially hold everybody up for 5 minutes or more. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. Is it against the rules? Technically, no. But you could also make a case that punishing someone for doing this is not right because, again, it's not against the rules. but it is ridiculous, and I don't know why players derive enjoyment from doing this, honestly. Okay. Well, this game is going to hold everybody up because the other game is probably, rook c2, and that's a draw. And so we have just this game still remaining. Black should just resign. I mean, never ever again. Not sure who that is, but from the perspective of sportsmanship, he's not doing himself any favors, and neither is Black. Really, both of them aren't. I think if both players were forfeited one of these times, people would stop doing it, but obviously you can't do that. Yeah, that's the last game of the round. As this as this first grade tomfoolery is going down, let's review the standings. Because clearly neither player has graduated kindergarten. Let's go to the standings for a second. We can see here, and I'm going to update the standings in a second, Dubov and Jose are on top with 8 out of 9. We've got not a big group. We've got 3 players, 7.5. We've got Penguin, that's Andrew Tang, Aram Hakobian, and Sergoy. And Hikaru, part of a very big contingent with 7 out of 9. So he probably is out of contention of first place, but he can still make it to the top 3 with 2 wins in the last 2 rounds. So we've got 2 rounds to go here in the Late Title Tuesday. Hope you're enjoying the show. And this is not the show that I hope you're enjoying. I don't think anybody's enjoying this show. White's got checkmate in 55 different ways. And it would be karma if he stalemated him, but he's obviously not going to. Okay, now it's going to be actually hard not to deliver checkmate. Okay, well, this is just a comedy. And he finally checkmates Black, to the joy and cries of celebration of everybody watching. That ends the game. Yeah, you don't see this over the board. I mean, that is something that the internet creates. A good point made in the chat. Over the board, this almost never happens because the players are facing each other physically. And just like with, stuff going on in social media, a lot of stuff you won't do if the other person is sitting across from you. But that's just part of online chess. Got to roll with it. Got to live with it. But fortunately, the game is over, and that starts off round 10 of 11. 2 more games to go, and Dubov is indeed facing Jose for all of the marbles. This is the game that we're going to watch. Another BOGO Indian. Jose, a very solid player. He's hard to beat. He's got all of the skills necessary to win Title Tuesday repeatedly. He's fast. He's got a great repertoire. He's got good tactical vision, but he's also very positionally strong, as evidenced by his repertoire against 1d4. Dubov has the 2 bishops, so I feel like White is a little bit better in this position, no question about it. But Jose likes these structures. So in blitz games, it's so much more important to go for structures and positions that you are comfortable with than positions which the engine evaluates as being best. C6 by Jose as he tries to clamp down on the center. C6 though looks a little bit awkward. And look at what Dubov did there. Bishop G2 to F1. Looks weird, right? Is he setting up his pieces for the next game? No. He's moving his bishop off of the standoff with Black's bishop so that after he moves his knight back, which he just did, Jose wouldn't have the possibility of trading bishops. But Jose, just in time, he plays the move D5, preventing Dubov from expanding in the center with E4. That's why Jose played C6. A very savvy decision there. A4 by Dubov, freezing the pawns. Rook's getting into action with Rook C8, Rook C1. And now Dubov could consider activating his dark squared bishop, which is now biting on granite, staring at the D4 pawn. White has a couple of plans in this position. The main one is to push E4, but he doesn't have the firepower necessary to organize that. E4 would simply drop a pawn here, and Black has more defenders on the square than White has attackers. So that doesn't work, and Jose is starting to expand on the queen side. I like what Jose is doing here, but White can actually win a pawn. So what White can do now is trade on B5, take on C8, force a trade of a lot of pieces here, and then take back on B5. But Jose will play Rook B8 and win the pawn back. But the problem is at the very end of this line, the pawn on A5 is going to be a major weakness. Instead, Daniel Dubov deciding to take once and play C5. So he goes for a different approach. I thought he should have gone for that endgame. I thought he was better, but instead the queens are kept on the board. He goes Rook A1, discouraging Jose from breaking through down the A file with A4. Knight B8, an excellent move, repositioning the knight on C6, which is an immaculate blockading square. Dubov doing some blockading of his own, stopping the A pawn from moving forward as he goes rook c1. Bishop c2 there was a pretty nasty idea, so he prevents that as well. The position looking probably about equal. The eval bar seems to bear that out. This is probably closer to equality than to anything else. And the question here is going to be who flinches first? Who is the one that decides to open up the center? Will it be Dubov, who can probably find a way to get e4 in, or will it be Jose, who breaks through with e5? Or will it be a move like knight e4? We'll probably see a long maneuvering battle here as the players try to maneuver their pieces in position in preparation for the opening of the center. A very interesting position. Dubov a little bit down on the clock, and they're repeating moves. Jose definitely doesn't mind a draw here. Probably Dubov doesn't either. So we might see a draw by repetition. Dubov is down on the clock. So if you're Dubov, you probably don't want to do anything crazy. And Jose doesn't want to take too much risk here either. And so a draw by repetition, not the most interesting result, but a very understandable one as the players move to 8.5 out of 10. And they will probably at least share the lead. But that paves open the pathway for the players who have 7.5. There are 3 of them. If they win their games, then they get up and share the lead. So let's have a look at our other games from the round. Let's take a look at the players who've got 7.5. One of them is Andrew Tang. One of them, Jeffrey Zhang, has half a point less. Essentially, the players who currently have 7.5 have all played each other. So some of them are dropping down to play the top players with 7. That's a nasty pairing for Andrew. And Jeffrey with a big initiative, knight g5, opening up the h-file. Andrew capturing on g5, snagging a pawn, but this is looking so bad. Look at the pressure that Jeffrey has on the g7 pawn, and now f4, f5. Oh, he goes to e4. I don't like that at all. I thought he should have played f4, f5, and there was no way to stop the move f5. A very, very strange oversight by Jeffrey. Maybe e4 is also okay, but this looks so much worse, and his idea, of course, is to play the move d5. But he's allowed a move like queen c5, which pins the pawn to the bishop and gives Andrew a new lease on life. Can he get himself back in the game? Andrew down to 24 seconds, but with the time situation, I don't really see it happening. But he goes queen f3. That's another excellent move. And now Jeffrey has no easy way of dislodging the knight from e6. He rushed it. He played e4 too quickly, and now Andrew is right back in the game, and we know how accurate he can play even in time pressure. Here we go. Okay, e takes d5 and f4. So Jeffrey saying better late than never, driving that pawn up to f5. So he's threatening f5 and then rook takes g7 check. But Andrew could actually allow that because now he has the f8 square as a retreating square for his king. So I would play a move like rook d8 here and prepare to take on d4 and try to get counterplay down the d file. But 5 seconds for Andrew. Can he do it? He's down to 3 seconds. He's got to make a move. He's down to 1 second. Oh, queen h7. He misses it, and he panics in time pressure, and he's going to lose. Rook takes g7 is mate on the spot. What a game by Jeffrey. Not perfect, but he was playing quickly enough, kept his foot on the gas pedal. And Dubov and Jose are happy to see that result. It means Andrew fails in his attempt to share the lead. But we've got 2 more players on 7.5, and they are playing each other. This is a pivotal game. It will determine who will join Dubov and Jeffrey, Dubov and Jose, that is, for the lead. And it seems right now that the likeliest candidate is Aram Hakobian, who has the white pieces here against Sergey. He's up 2 pawns. The only drawback of white's position is the state of the rook on a5, which is currently kind of trapped. But the problem is that it cannot be attacked, right? The pawn on b4 is defending it nicely. So as long as white extricates the rook from a5, he will be completely winning as he goes b5. That is what he's trying to do. c5 by black, desperately trying to keep the rook trapped on a5. That is Sergey's only chance. But I don't think he's going to be able to do it because after rook a6 and rook d6, white easily gets the rook out of jail. And now he's got protected passers with which he will be able to win the game. And we are going to have 3 players who will share the lead on 8.5 out of 10. This is setting us up for a photo finish in the last round. Don't go anywhere. Hope you're enjoying this late title Tuesday with 1.5 rounds to go. Rook f6 by Aram Hakobian attacking this bishop, paving the way for the pawns to rip black's king apart. Rook f6 attacking, moving, advancing, taking, winning, a6 check, and it's over. b6 now. Look at the pawns tearing black limb from limb. Knight takes d5 is also possible. You could throw that in there to activate the knight and prepare to assist the pawns in their inexorable march forward. Don't go king d3 because of bishop b5. Still tricks, but Aram nicely repositioning his king to safety. And now knight c7 wins the rook and wins the game. And it is official. We'll have 3 players on top. How did Hikaru Nakamura do, you might ask? Well, Hikaru was still playing, and Hikaru was actually struggling mightily against Zhigalko. Zhigalko is better in this endgame. And probably will this be a draw? I don't know. Hikaru's going to lose another pawn. Hikaru down to 2 seconds. He has no winning chances here whatsoever. Rook d7. Zhigalko down in no time. Rook g7. Hikaru harassing his pawns. I think this is a draw. Whoa! And Zhigalko giving up all of his pawns. Why did he do that? Rook h4. b7. Hikaru wins! Oh, God. Hikaru's going to win. Only Hikaru pulls this off. Rook takes b7, rook g7 check, a classic technique. And Sergei Zhigalko overpresses in an unlosable position and gives Hikaru the win. But make no mistake, there's a reason why Hikaru is the only one who wins these games. It's because he sets up the conditions that allow him to do that. That was absolutely classic Hikaru right there. More than a small measure of luck, but don't forget Jose Ro Capablanca. Good players are lucky, right? Luck in chess should be put in quotes because you manufacture your own luck with incredibly resilient play and finding all of the defensive resources. Hikaru keeps his chances alive. He's on 8 out of 10. And conceivably, you could envision a reality where he or Jeffrey Zhang or any of the other players with 8 out of 10, and there are quite a few, some of them could even perhaps share in the lead. There are 3 players with 8.5. If all of them lose to players with 8 out of 10, then somebody on 8 out of 10 could actually share the lead. So don't go anywhere. Nothing has been decided yet. The games from round 10 are almost all over. Let me see. There are only a couple of games remaining. We've got a grandmaster here with the white pieces losing his game to M. Bojan, very strong international master from Bosnia. And it's a queen against king. Then we have this game, which is a king, rook, and knight versus rook. We'll see how it ends. And I just need 1 second. We'll keep this game on. Okay, so this is a draw. Obviously, this is a theoretical draw, but it's not an easy draw to make with no time on the clock. But black has plenty of time, so I think this is going to be a pretty surefire draw by Rutenko, who had a nice game against Andrew earlier in the tournament, but dropped off, which is totally understandable given the strength of the opponents in this tournament. This is the last game in the round, and it's black wins on time. Oh, white flagged! Oh my God, white flagged! What a tragic loss by Slower Than You. And he was indeed slower than Rutenko. He loses on time. What a funny occurrence there. And that ends the games from round 10. Round 11 is upon us. And we've got Dubov against Enjal. That's Dubov against Aram Hakobian, 2 of the leaders facing off. And Jose Martinez is playing against, I believe, Hikaru Nakamura. Jose drops down to play Hikaru. We will keep an eye on these 2 games. Hikaru in a must-win scenario with the black pieces, a C3 Sicilian. And Jose, with a win, will guarantee himself at least a share of first place. So we're very likely to have a shared first place situation because we've got 3 players on 8.5 out of 10, as you can see from the standings here, which I'm going to update right now. You can see the standings in front of you. 3 players with 8.5 out of 10 and a big contingent on 8 out of 10. So neither Jose nor Dubov nor Aram Hakobian would be satisfied with the draw. It would guarantee them a good standing in the tournament, but it wouldn't even guarantee them first place. Okay, and Jose Martinez pushing d5, and I'm not sure I like the way Hikaru has handled the opening. He's allowed white to make the move, which you normally don't want to allow in an IQP position, the move d5. And clearly Hikaru has done something wrong here. He's taking his time. He's clearly unhappy. Jose has set himself up with an essentially risk-free position, a symmetrical pawn structure, and a big initiative by white here. Bishop b7 by Hikaru, desperately trying to complete his development. Knight takes f6 check, and queen takes d8 check, and we get an endgame. Let's switch back to Dubov's game. Dubov has already made a draw. So Dubov and Aram Hakobian have made a draw in 5 moves. They both sit on 9 out of 10. They wanted to guarantee themselves at least a share of the prize. And Jose Martinez, if he beats Hikaru Nakamura in this game, will win the tournament. With a draw, he will share first place with Dubov, Hakobian, and anybody on 8 out of 10 who wins their game. So there will be a big logjam on first place if Jose does not manage to win his game. If Jose loses, it will be the same situation, and Hikaru Nakamura will share first place. So Hikaru in a must-win scenario, but can he pull out a draw out of this endgame? I doubt it. This is not an endgame that's easy to win for Hikaru. He's got a slightly worse position, and Jose is playing it safe. Okay. Bishop b5 check by Martinez. Now Hikaru could cover that with a bishop, but then that leads to a completely symmetrical endgame, and Jose really shouldn't lose this, but we know, everybody knows of Hikaru's ability to create, to literally squeeze water from a stone to pull out wins, even out of seemingly unwinnable endgames. He just did that against Sergei Zhigalko, a heartbreaker there for the Belarusian Grandmaster. And in this case, Jose, with a slight advantage. Why is he slightly better? Because he's got the better placed pieces. He's got control of the D file. He's got a very nice knight on b5. And Hikaru is saddled with a couple of relatively weak pawns on the queen side, which are being pressured by both of White's minor pieces. So, but can Jose make anything of this initiative as he infiltrates to d7 with his rook? He wants to dislodge the knight from c6, and Hikaru dislodging White's knight from b5. The drawback of that move, though, is now Hikaru is saddled with a weak pawn on b6. And can Jose exploit that before Hikaru plays b6, b5, when both of the pawns will be defending each other? I don't think he can, because if he plays knight c7 here, and that's what Hikaru is trying to provoke, he wants Jose to play knight c7, but after knight c7, maybe Hikaru wants rook a7, and if bishop takes b6, black plays rook b7, and white is actually losing here because the bishop is attacked. You can't move the knight, and if you move the bishop back, you give up b2 with check. So Jose, he does play knight c7, but after rook a7, he is under no obligation to play bishop takes b6, and he finds an excellent move. He plays rook c1, he attacks the knight. He's much better here. Now that knight is forced to move, and once that knight moves, the rook on c1 establishes contact with the knight on c7, which means that the other rook is now free to roam about the cabin and roam about the cabinet at will, trying to capture the b6 pawn. Rook d6 here wins the pawn on b6. Jose now with serious winning chances. But he's low on time, and Hikaru trying to whip up counterplay with knight g4 and bishop b7. He's losing all of his pawns. Knight takes a6 now, wins the second pawn. I think Jose should capture that pawn. Knight takes a6. And White should be winning here, but he's down to 50 seconds. Hikaru over a minute up on the clock. Can Jose pull it off as he goes rook c2? He doesn't. He's reluctant to take on a6. Instead, he wants to make sure that the b2 pawn is nicely protected so that the bishop is free to move. So now if Hikaru plays rook f to b8, Jose can simply drop his bishop back to d4, and the b2 pawn is now protected by the other rook. The rook on c2 doing hero's work here. It's protecting three things at once: the knight, the pawn on f2, and the knight on and the pawn on b2. Is it overloaded? I don't see any overloading tactics. I think that rook is actually quite safe. So how does Hikaru whip up counterplay? You can see the eval bar is giving a clear advantage for White. Jose is up a healthy pawn. Hikaru with no clear counterplay. Rook dc6 now. Rook dc6 is the only move. You got to keep the knight protected. What is Jose thinking about? He's losing a lot of time here on moves that he should be making quickly, but he's just trying to double check everything. And now Hikaru wants to play knight e5. Hikaru wants to play knight e5 and dislodge the rook from the 6th rank. And then the bishop is going to be in trouble. I feel like Jose is dropping too low on the clock. I feel like he might not be able to deal with the complexity of the position. He's down to 26 seconds. He is better after knight takes a6, knight e5, and bishop c5, but he doesn't go for it. He goes knight d5, and now Hikaru can go rook d7 and try to infiltrate his way to the d1 square. Material is currently equal. Jose still with the better position because he's got the more effective pawn majority. He's got the better chances to create a pass pawn on the queen side, and he finds a way to stabilize the situation. Now rook d1 is impossible. Hikaru trying to keep as many pieces on the board as possible, but Jose forcing a trade of rooks. With every piece that's traded, White's position becomes easier and easier to play, and Hikaru's winning chances are dwindling here as he drops to 45 seconds, and so is his time advantage. A rook trade is inevitable. a4 by Jose as he advances his pawns on the queen side. h5 by Hikaru. He does the same. We've got a pawn race. a5 by Jose. And Jose just wants to go b4 and b5 as he actually refrains from a rook trade. He moves his rook over to c4, attacking h4, g5 by Hikaru, defending the pawn. 17 seconds by Jose as he moves his king out to the side. That might have been a bit too slow. Hikaru going bishop f4, pinning his bishop to the knight. Knight moves away to f5. What's going on here? Knight takes h4 is now a threat, and Hikaru defends against that with a very nice move. Knight d5 supporting the bishop. 12 seconds by Jose. He moves his bishop back. Hikaru making progress, but so is Jose. He pushes b4. But I don't like what's happened here for Jose. I thought he should have traded rooks. By not trading rooks, he's now given Hikaru's rooks a new lease on life and chances to infiltrate down the center as he goes g3, trying to force a trade of pawns. Now Hikaru has an incredible move, king g6, but he misses it. He lets Jose anchor his knight into f5, king up to g6, both sides with no time. King b3, Jose bringing his own king up to the game. Knight f6, but knight takes g4? No, knight takes g4, there's rook c takes g4. Hikaru intercepts the rook with bishop f4. Jose down to 8 seconds. He should probably go rook d4 here and trade rooks. Knight d4, knight e4, Hikaru making progress. Jose's piece is starting to collapse. I think Hikaru's going to win the game. Knight takes c5 and rook e4.
And rookie 4, he's going to win the night. And Jose Martinez loses the game. Unbelievable display by Hikaru. 2 games in a row, winning unwinnable positions. Hikaru Nakamura, that's why he's the best blitz player on earth. It's because of games like this. And he will join in with 9 out of 11 and join into the top. But B7, wait a minute. Don't shovel dirt on him yet. Okay, you can shovel dirt on him. Bishop D6, Hikaru giving up his bishop for White's remaining pawn, leaving him with 2 unstoppable passers on the king side. Hikaru Nakamura pulls out a win, a heartbreaking result for Jose, who won't even make it into the top 3. Hikaru Nakamura on 9 out of 10. That leaves a couple of players still trying to get their share of the top. I was going to say Jose Zhang. Jeffrey Zhang, he's winning against Vincent Keimer, but he's down to 1 second. Jeffrey trying to make his way to the top. He's up 2 pieces here. Vincent trying to take as many pawns as he can take, but this is an easy win for Jeffrey Zhang. Knight F5 check, but now he's got to trade queens. No, he doesn't. He goes queen B7. Now he's got mate. Oh, bishop B3. Bishop B3, and he wins the queen. And Jeffrey Zhang is also up on top with 9 out of 11. We're going to have a logjam at the top with at least 4 players. No, we've got 5 players on 9 out of 11. Matthias Bluebaum, the German Grandmaster, he crept his way up as well, and he's also on 9 out of 11. So we're going to have, it's official now, nobody else with 8 out of 10 is playing, so it's official. We're going to have 5 players on top, with Daniel Dubov technically having the best tie breaks, 0.5 tiebreak points better than Hikaru Nakamura, who is officially in 2nd place. Let's update the standings. And the standings will automatically update after the round concludes. That should be in about a minute from now. And perhaps the tie breaks will actually change. We've got just a couple of games still remaining. We've got a nice win here by Grandmaster Gascon over Arturo Gabrielian. What an incredible finish here as a logjam at the top in the late title Tuesdays with 5 players sharing first place with 9 out of 11. 9 out of 11 generally doesn't win the tournament. There have been only a few title Tuesdays that I'm aware of where 9 out of 11 has won the tournament. And this game is over. There's only one more game remaining. It is this one, and it is about to end in checkmate, although White is struggling mightily. There we go. Queen G1. It's made. It's over. The tournament is over. It's official. And Daniel Dubov by tie breaks in first. Hikaru by tie breaks in second. And Arama Hakobian, Armenian Grandmaster, currently living in the U.S., he scores 9 out of 11 to make it to 3rd place by tie breaks. 5 players total with 9 out of 11. And what a late title Tuesday we had with Hikaru Nakamura. Really the story of the tournament. Oh, Hikaru's in first. Hikaru actually in first according to tie breaks. I apologize. The tie breaks updated after the round, and Hikaru Nakamura makes his way to first place with Hakobian in second and Dubov actually in third. The tie breaks, of course, depend on the result of the last round. What a finish. Unbelievable. Just unbelievable. And Hikaru winning 2 games, 2 end games in which he seemed to be dead in the water. An early loss. But that's why he's amazing. Hikaru Nakamura, first by tie breaks. Aram Hakobian second. Dubov third. Jeffrey Zhang fourth. And Matthias Bluebaum fifth. All of them with 9 out of 11. Let's check out the standings before we close out the show. You can see here first, second, and third, the medals. And you can see Hikaru's tie breaks a little bit, a smidge better than Hakobian's, and a big, big group with 8.5 out of 11. Jose Martinez with a tragic loss in the last round. Vincent Keimer, also a tragic loss, but such is Title Tuesday. That is why we watch them. Ladies and gentlemen, that means it's time for us to wrap up the show. I hope you enjoyed my coverage. This was incredibly fun to watch. I love playing in Title Tuesday, but watching is also very fun. I get courtside seats, and I get to experience the thrill of the tournament, and I hope that you enjoyed this tournament as well. That concludes Title Tuesday for the day. We'll see you next Tuesday. And for now, ladies and gentlemen, congratulations to the winners, Hikaru, Aram Hakobian, Dubov, Jeffrey Zhang, and Matthias Bluebaum, sharing first place in the late Title Tuesday. We'll see you next Tuesday. We'll see you May the 10th for more action from Title Tuesdays. And for now, on behalf of our entire team at chess.com, thank you to everybody watching on Twitch, on YouTube, and elsewhere. I'm Grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky. I hope you enjoyed the show, and I wish you a very pleasant rest of your Tuesday. Bye for now.